Warfare never stands still, and weapons technology needs to keep moving to stay ahead.
Good to go, let's move! Go, go! Go windows, go windows!
These American soldiers are equipped with the latest, most advanced firearms, vital for their survival.
Move it!
They're the product of an evolutionary struggle that's taken place over millennia.
Check the door, check the door! There we go! Go back!
As designers use evolving technology to produce ever deadlier weapons.
One down!
Military history is one area where technology plays an absolutely critical role.
Got you covered.
Designers are always looking for new answers to the question, what makes the ultimate weapon?
There are 4 key factors: range, accuracy, strength, and rate of fire. And what we see through history is weapon designers, be it bows, be it crossbows, be it firearms, be it machine guns, are all playing around with those 4 factors.
House fire, clear. Fire, just move. Get ready to move out.
Over thousands of years, there have been many innovations in weaponry, but only a few have transformed ground warfare. Some of those can be traced back to the earliest military empires. Macedonia in 326 BC, the peak of one warlike leader's power. Alexander the Great wasn't the first empire builder the world had seen. But it's the battle-hungry Macedonian king who conquers most of the classical world. He does it by exploiting the most advanced metals of his time, bronze and iron. The original ideas came from Alexander's neighbors, the Greeks. In the first millennium BC, the Greeks used bronze to make highly effective defensive armor, like breastplates and helmets, and iron to give their offensive weapons a deadlier thrust. These weapons, in conjunction with the tactics they used, gave the Greeks their fighting edge. They build a formidable military machine. It marks the true beginning of organized Western warfare. They called it the phalanx. And the basic principles of its success can be seen on rugby pitches around the world.
Engage!
The phalanx relies on teamwork and organization. It moves as a controlled, cohesive body. The soldiers fight in regimented blocks, shoulder to shoulder.
But they all felt they were part of a group, and they liked to fight as an organized unit, rather like a rugby scrum is today. All for one and one for all.
The unit is not only cohesive, it's bristling with armor and weapons.
I've got to remember, I would be one of 10,000 men, similarly equipped like this, like a giant armadillo. So basically, this is a combination of defending myself with the shield from any missiles or thrusts coming, but also offensively going forward and stabbing in the face, in the stomach, straight into the unprotected groin there, and then another one to finish him off, and then ready for the next one.
By the time of Alexander's empire, the armaments used by the phalanx grow even more deadly. The spears evolve into a 6-meter-long killing weapon they call the sarissa, more than 3 times the height of the average soldier. The sarissa gives Alexander's men new reach. The first 5 ranks can now impale the enemy. This more efficient use of the weapon turns the phalanx into a supreme offensive machine.
For its period, the phalanx was the most successful fighting unit in the world. Nothing could stand against it.
Okay.
But the phalanx has an Achilles heel. 197 BC in Greece, the Battle of Cynocephali. The classical world's coming superpower, Rome, challenges the established military supremacy of the phalanx. It is a bloody confrontation.
When the Macedonian phalanx met the Romans, they were aghast, they were shocked. They'd never seen wounds like that.
The Romans managed to completely hack people to pieces. Heads lying around, spleens split open, bodies hacked in half. Basically, it was a massive butcher's shop.
Whilst all other armies have fallen before the phalanx, the Romans adapt their battlefield tactics to exploit its weaknesses. Those weaknesses can be seen back at the rugby field. The phalanx works well going forward on flat plains, where it's rigid structures an asset. But the phalanx can't turn easily. And at Cynocephali, the Romans use their knowledge of tactics to exploit this, attacking from the rear and the flank. And the phalanx has another weakness. On uneven terrain, its structure is liable to break up. That day, the phalanx is cut to pieces, and a shockwave runs through the eastern Mediterranean. But it isn't just Roman tactics that forces this defeat. Victory is achieved with an exceptional weapon, which the Romans will use to enforce their power for 400 years, the gladius. And it's made with a revolutionary new material, steel. Hard steel's produced when iron absorbs carbon from a carbon-rich material like charcoal fuel. Roman smiths create the gladius by welding together two strips of iron with a strip of steel between them. The blade is forged at around 1,000 degrees centigrade. Its steel core becomes the weapon's cutting edge, made razor sharp on a grindstone. The shortness of the gladius blade allows the Romans to get around the long sarissas and into their enemies' faces.
The primary method of attack was to thrust low and upwards, aiming for the stomach. The stomach and this central soft, squidgy area here, that is the place to kill people. Because it has a very, very good cutting edge as well, down both sides, hardened steel, if you need to, if you're suddenly surrounded, for example, and you need to slash out, it's very, very useful for that. Doesn't really matter where you slash, every bit will count. The odd leg here, the odd arm there. This was the weapon that effectively conquered all known comers. This is it.
A simple but unique stabbing blade, which allows them to build an empire. For the modern soldier, warfare has moved on from the face-to-face combat that was so effective for the Romans to long-range firearms which kill from 500 meters. The ability to strike from great distance is now taken for granted. It's been achieved through a number of inspired technological breakthroughs. And one was the bow, which used great power to propel an archer's arrow an immense distance. 1415, Agincourt, northern France. A key battle in the war between the French and English, which has lasted for 3 generations. A menacing army of around 20,000 French, many on horseback, fighting on home soil, confident of success. Facing them, King Henry V of England, with a force 1/3 the size, on foot, but equipped with something called the Longbow.
Archers, stretch! Stretch!
From around 220 meters, the archers unleash a barrage of arrows. The French cavalry charge, but can't break through. The French come again, this time on foot, but again the English archers fill the sky with arrows. In the narrow, boggy field of Agincourt, the French attack is blunted. And face to face, against the odds, the English win the day. How King Henry and his English underdogs snatched victory at Agincourt is still a matter of conjecture. Mark Stretton thinks he knows the reason why. He's written about the bow and has been shooting one since he was 6. Stretton believes victory was the result of the longbow's ability to strike the enemy at a distance. By firing at plate armor from 45 meters, Mark demonstrates the ferocity of this medieval powerhouse. It's believed that from 220 meters, arrows wouldn't have pierced armor, but Stretton's convinced the longbow could still have immobilized the French cavalry.
If a knight got hit with more than one arrow at once, the impact alone could knock him clean off the back of the horse.
It's the arrow's weight that makes the difference, 1/10 of a kilogram.
If we take a 7-pound sledgehammer and swing it at 32 feet a second, it has the same impact as this arrow travelling at 150 feet a second, which is more or less 100 miles an hour.
But in order to turn this into a battle-winning weapon, the English need something else. Specialists, man and bow melded into a unique fighting machine. The English archer is strong, but also trained to achieve the precise angle that delivers long-range, accurate fire.
I know that feels too low, that feels too high, but just there feels comfortable. That is right.
To achieve this fighting efficiency, there is a high price to pay.
For a longbowman to have been good, that necessitated training and necessitated years and years of training.
At Agincourt, these specialist soldiers produce a formidable barrage, triggering the French slide to defeat. The longbow has many of the qualities of the ultimate warrior weapon: accuracy, range, rate of fire. And these characteristics help determine the way medieval commanders fight their battles. But the future will be different. An explosive new technology will recast how generals fight wars, make the specialist archers redundant, and the battlefield far more dangerous for the soldier. Its origins were in China, around 600 years earlier. The story has it, the emperor's alchemists were looking for the elixir of life when they stumbled across the pathway to death.
Gunpowder transformed the world of warfare.
Gunpowder's explosive power comes from a potent mixture. First, sulfur to increase speed of combustion. Then charcoal to provide fuel. And finally, saltpeter to create oxygen. The knowledge of how gunpowder was made migrated to Europe from the east. But the evolution of the firearm was a slow process. The first heavy infantry weapon to be used in large numbers is the matchlock musket, adopted by armies around 1500.
This is a matchlock. It gets its name from the ignition system, which starts by having a piece of match or cord. This is one of the drawbacks that you would have if you're in a combat situation. Presto. Now we have fire.
The matchlock can now be loaded with powder and ball. Next, gunpowder is added to the pan to prime the weapon for firing. Cheap to make, the matchlock is adopted from Western Europe to Japan. The firearm changes the balance between offense and defense. For 2,000 years, new weapons have been matched by better protective armor. But the musket ball overwhelms the powers of armor and drives it from the theater of war.
The period when armour disappeared from the European battlefield was one where armourers had hit a brick wall. They could make bulletproof armour, but it was too heavy for anyone to wear.
The matchlock musket transforms warfare. But it has flaws. Because it relies on a lighted match cord, the ignition system is dangerous and unreliable. The arrival of a new generation of musket will cure these firing problems. It will become the universal soldier's weapon. (1815). Europe's greatest armies clash near a Belgian village called Waterloo. It's one of the bloodiest battles fought by Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte with muskets and artillery. In the choking smoke of battle, many soldiers can't see much beyond the end of their own weapon. In a single day, 47,000 men are either killed or wounded. And one of the reasons for these horrific numbers is the killing potential of the soldier's firearm. Most soldiers on that day are using a weapon called the flintlock musket, which is deadly. And one reason it's so lethal is a highly reliable ignition system. When the trigger's pulled, the flint strikes the metal frizzen or strike plate, producing sparks which detonate the powder charge in the pan below. This flame ignites the main powder charge, launching the musket ball down the barrel. The effect of musket technology is to cheapen the life of the ordinary soldier because he's easier to replace. A musketeer can be trained to stand firm and fire in a matter of months, compared to years for the highly skilled longbow archer.
War became more of a mass production enterprise in which the soldier was a small cog in a very large wheel.
In a typical exchange of musket fire, commanders push their troops up close to the enemy in densely packed lines. It's the soldier who pays the price.
There's a lot of fire and the overwhelming noise from all the guns discharging, artillery firing, the moans of people who have been wounded. All of this would contribute to a sense of confusion.
And the scary part for you as the soldier is you have to stand right out in the open and attention with your enemy facing you maybe 50 yards away and all those muskets pointed at you. It had been absolutely horrifying.
But the commanders don't sacrifice their men out of malice. Musket tactics are determined by the weapon, which was accurate to only 50 meters. It's this reality which makes the generals fight at such close quarters. What was needed was a gun which would allow soldiers to engage the enemy from further away. This is the M107 long-range sniper rifle, the cutting edge of high-powered rifle technology. A gun that's capable of killing from a distance of 2,000 meters. Today, in military operations, this kind of pinpoint accuracy is the norm. We've arrived at this sniper's rifle via a chain of events which started in America's Revolutionary War. George Washington sees the military potential of a weapon which for nearly 3 centuries has been used mainly for hunting.
These rifles were incredibly effective at 100 to 200 yards, and Washington knew this in the American Revolution.
As American rebels clash with British professional soldiers, Washington recruits woodsmen with their accurate hunting rifles and uses them as prototype snipers.
It was almost like a terror weapon. It was good at hitting individuals.
That's the beginning of a sniper's culture, where you start to pick out a target of high value. And he stalks that individual and shoots him.
the rifle is so accurate because of a unique feature, which is best illustrated with the spiral pass, a technique used by American football players. The quarterback rolls the football between fingers and thumb as he throws it, causing the ball to spin in midair. One of the basic principles of physics is that a spinning object resists any change of direction, and the net result is greater range and, crucially, accuracy. It works for the football quarterback, and it works in ballistics. If we compare the barrel of a rifle with a musket, we see that the musket is smooth on the inside, hence the name smooth bore. But a rifle barrel is scored with spiral grooves. It's these grooves which make the bullet spin as it leaves the barrel. As with the football, the spin serves to stabilize the projectile. The spinning bullet is balanced like a flying gyroscope. But before the rifle can take its place as a universal battlefield weapon, technology has to solve another problem. The rifle is very slow to load because of the tight fit of the ball in the grooved barrel. Yet when the breakthrough finally comes in the 1840s, it isn't an advance in barrel design. It's a new ammunition. The Minié ball, or bullet, named after its French inventor Claude-Étienne Minié, is simple and deadly. 4 grease-filled grooves made it easy to load, but the bullet's genius is in its hollow base. On ignition, the hollow base expands, gripping the rifling grooves inside the barrel, making the bullet spin. Once the Minié bullet joins the rifled barrel, it becomes the rifle musket, ready for the battlefield. 1862, the Battle of Antietam in America's Civil War. 87,000 Union troops confront 40,000 Confederates. And for one of the first times in history, both fighting armies are equipped with a new generation of rifle muskets. The consequences will be terrible.
Here we have 2 weapons that were used during the American Civil War. This is a smoothbore musket firing a round ball. This is a rifled musket firing a conical Minié bullet.
Old and new technologies compete head-to-head in an accuracy test, 6 shots apiece at 70 meters. First, the smoothbore musket. Next up, the rifle and Minié bullet.
Okay, smoothbore, 69 caliber, may have broken both arms, but there's only 2 hits out of 6 shots. We're out past the effective range of this of a guy hitting who he's aiming at. And that creates problems when you're trying to kill people.
Now the rifle.
First 3 shots, this guy would lose his arm. Up here, probably his collarbone. This is probably close to a gut shot up on the hip. You've reduced the fighters by 6 men. Here you've reduced them by 2 men.
So all 6 shots in the target. At 70 meters, the rifle is 3 times more effective than the musket.
So you can load this weapon almost as quickly as a smoothbore musket, but it fires very accurately. And that makes weapons incredibly deadly.
Not only are the new weapons more deadly, they arrive at a time when they can be mass-produced. In the decades leading up to the Civil War, at armories like Harper's Ferry, Virginia, a revolution has taken place, driving weapons production forward with the power of industrialization. Individual craftsmen are replaced by machines. Lathes carve rifle stocks. Machine tools copy gun barrels. And the outcome is standardization, identical firearms with interchangeable parts. And as the country surges towards the bloody reckoning of the Civil War, the repeater rifle uses a metal cartridge to combine powder and bullet with a magazine. This produces an accelerated rate of fire, one shot every 3 seconds, which will also leave its mark in the war. At the Battle of Antietam, one tiny field changes hands 15 times in firefights that kill around 2,000 men. By the end of the day, there are 23,000 casualties, the single bloodiest day in American military history. And while it isn't the only factor, the accuracy of the new rifle musket plays its part. And this weapon goes on killing, even after the battle was over. Many of the victims injured by rifle fire will later die of agonizing infection. Today, modern ballistics tests can reveal one reason why. George Wunderlich, Executive Director of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, is also a firearms expert. He'll shoot both weapons into ballistic gelatine blocks, which react like human tissue.
We're going to see if this will help tell us what were the doctors actually seeing in the wounds they were treating during the course of the war.
First, the smooth-bore musket and ball. Next up is the rifle and Minié bullet.
Let's take a look at our test results. As we can see, the round ball has lodged in our ballistic gel. When we go over here, this is our newer technology. This is the mini bullet, the conical bullet that came out of our rifle. And what we see here is that the velocity has allowed the bullet to be carried completely out of the block. No bullet has been trapped.
So the musket ball has cut a straight wound, resulting in little destruction of soft tissue, which would probably heal relatively quickly. But the higher velocity rifle bullet has pushed tissue aside, creating a trail of disruption and a complex and possibly deadly wound. In many cases, the attending surgeon simply amputated the limb rather than risk a fatal secondary infection. Battlefield commanders also play a part in the bloodbath of the Civil War. They are slow to adapt to the new military landscape.
Well, the technology has changed, the tactics really haven't changed. Marching right out in the open, shoulder to shoulder, like they would have done in the days of Napoleon. Even in Napoleon's time, this was dicey. In the age of rifled muskets, this was suicide.
When a new technology appears and you're confronted with it, you rely on the old ways. And what it ends up becoming is a slaughter.
Finally, the defense responds to the power of the new offensive weapons. Both armies begin to dig trenches to take shelter. Trenches which foreshadow the events of World War I. As soldiers return to their fields and towns, the industrial processes which have revolutionized weapons production can now be applied to a new consumer market, from sewing machines to locomotives.
Not just firearms, but all kinds of different products begin to copy that idea of making interchangeable parts. We're not quite at Ford's assembly line, but we're on the way there.
There's always some, we can call it a rake-off, some benefit to society. It's perhaps ironic, though, that we always seem to feel we need to start by killing people. That's the first major aim that drives us, and then we are willing to apply this to more peaceful circumstances.
Today's soldiers use weapons that have little in common with rifle muskets. This M2 50 caliber roof-mounted machine gun is capable of firing around 500 rounds per minute. The machine gun is now one of the most destructive forces in ground war's arsenal. But surprisingly, the roots of this technology go back to the time of the Civil War. By the 1850s, designers have improved the accuracy and range of the ordinary soldier's firearm. Now they turn their attention to its rate of fire, and industrialization gives them the tools for the job. American doctor Richard J. Gatling comes up with a design for the world's first really successful machine gun. Where a Civil War rifle musket fired roughly 3 rounds per minute, the Gatling gun increased that rate of fire 200-fold to 600 rounds per minute. Gatling's machine gun is an imperfect prototype. Bulky as a small artillery piece, it has to be hauled by horses around the battlefield. But the idea of a rapid-fire weapon proves seductive. A new inventor is needed to develop the concept. Nothing in Hiram Maxim's background gives a clue as to what his legacy might be. Born in Maine, USA, the son of a mechanic, his early inventions are innocuous. A hair-curling iron, various coffee substitutes. But in the 1880s, Maxim leaves America for Europe. It's said he was told if he wished to make his fortune, he should invent something that allowed Europeans to kill each other more easily. Maxim obliges and creates one of World War I's most infamous weapons, the Maxim gun. The great technological breakthrough is that it doesn't rely on a crank handle. It's self-powered. The gun's recoil forces back the firing block. In one motion, this draws a new bullet from the belt and a spent bullet from the firing chamber, pushes the new bullet into the firing chamber, and ejects the spent cartridge. And it does all this 600 times a minute. Which is why it needs a water-filled jacket to keep the barrel cool. The Great War of 1914 is looming, and new customers stand in line to purchase the weapon, including Germany. The Maxim gun is truly an international product, and its impact on World War I's front line is of raw killing power. The Battle of the Somme on Europe's Western Front. At 7:30 a.m. on July the 1st, 1916, the first Allied soldiers go over the top. The infantry are ordered to cross no man's land and assault the German trenches. They've been led to believe the German defenses have been destroyed by artillery. But that isn't the case. It's a massacre.
The battalions that attacked at the Somme basically stood up and walked into German fire with full packs on their backs. The German machine gunners are so horrified at this that they're waving at British soldiers to go back. And then when they realize they're not going back, they gun them down.
One regiment at the Somme loses an unimaginable 92% of its men. The Maxim's effect is the complete opposite of the sniper's rifle. This is volume, not accuracy.
You see where the rounds are hitting or impacting out there. You don't even have to aim. If you have a line of troops coming towards you, you merely keep shooting where you see those fellows falling, and you keep shooting into them.
The gunners also learn to increase their kill rate by a tactic called interlocking fire. Seen from above, Maxim gunners sweep the battlefield from side to side. Where their zones of fire cross, soldiers face double the numbers of incoming bullets. The combination of the machine gun with trenches, artillery, and barbed wire define the course of the Great War. A defensive stalemate where an individual soldier's death is a statistic. The machine gun's deadly success opens the door for a new generation of portable automatic weapons. The decades leading up to World War II see the development of the submachine gun. The Thompson or Tommy gun is used in gangster wars in the 20s and then by Allied troops at war. But the long-term future will belong to a more adaptable weapon for the universal soldier. That weapon is the assault rifle. Today, it's the standard firearm of virtually every soldier and militiaman in the world. And it's versatile, capable of both single shot and bursts of fire.
Let's go. Oh my God, negative contact.
The US Army's current weapon, the M4, is highly advanced. But the stories of two earlier assault rifles, the AK-47 and the M16, indicate that a lower-tech weapon can in some cases be highly effective.
The AK-47, or automatic Kalashnikov of the year 1947, has really been, in many ways, one of the most important firearms in history.
Designed and built in the Soviet Union, its inventor, Mikhail Kalashnikov, was a tank commander in World War II. His assault rifle was adopted by the Russian army in 1949, for which he received the Stalin Prize First Class. The AK-47 is the most widely used military weapon in the world today. Up to 100 million are thought to have been sold. It's the weapon of armies, militias, freedom fighters, and terrorists. Strip an AK down, and it's easy to see why.
First of all, it's a very simple mechanism. We have a dust cover, a mainspring, a bolt carrier, and inside the bolt carrier, a bolt. We don't have a lot of moving parts, but what we do have is a certain looseness. You can hear that rattle. That rattle means that the parts have been given a certain amount of play. That play allows this weapon to function even though there may be dirt or filth from the firing of the weapon encrusted inside these grooves. That play means a high degree of reliability.
The weapon's simplicity also means anyone can learn to use an AK.
It's the guerrilla weapon of choice everywhere because it is the great equalizer with people whose societies are not as technologically inclined, and you see them everywhere.
The AK-47's been associated with some improbable wars. One is Vietnam, where in the 1960s and 70s, the US is pitted against a virtual peasant army. Of course, the AK-47 doesn't win the war for the North Vietnamese, but it comes to symbolize the differences between the two combatants. The American Army is equipped with an early version of the high-tech M16 rifle, America's primary infantry weapon from 1967, which has great accuracy and range. Their enemy, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, use the lower-tech AK-47.
What we basically have is a pickup truck and a Lamborghini. The AK-47 was meant to be very durable, very rugged, very simple and inexpensive to manufacture. The M16 was supposed to be lightweight, also very accurate.
But in the early years of the war, the M16 has a tendency to jam in damp and dirty jungle conditions. The Soviet Union's unsophisticated technology proves better suited.
We see stories from Vietnam that say that they were dug out of ditches or found in rivers, even buried, and then shot with no problem. It seems that dirt simply didn't affect this weapon. Well, now let's see if this will actually fire.
It was incredibly reliable, incredibly insensitive to abuse, and on a number of occasions, Marine units would re-equip themselves with captured AK-47s simply to take advantage of the reliability.
The assault rifle today has reached the pinnacle of what a soldier requires of a personal firearm. Offensive weapons, guns, are getting more accurate and more destructive. The soldier is more lethal than ever, but he's also more vulnerable to the enemy's guns. So protection is essential. And today, an ancient defensive idea has re-established itself on the battlefield because technology has advanced enough to make it effective once more. In 1965, chemist Stephanie Kwolek is working for DuPont in New York State. Her aim is to discover a material to make car tires lighter. But she stumbles across a new synthetic fiber 5 times stronger than steel. DuPont names this miraculous new material Kevlar. Its military potential later becomes clear as the raw material for body armor.
Well, here's the entry hole. Let's see what damage it's done. Hasn't gone through. I can feel it down at the bottom here.
Kevlar's strength is in its fibers, which create the effect of a spider's web. They absorb and dispense the energy of the bullet, greatly increasing the soldier's chance of survival. The soft ballistic jacket keeps out a pistol round. But on the battlefield, a soldier needs protection from high-velocity rounds. Troops use these hard ceramic plates, made like Kevlar from a synthetic substance, and one of the hardest known materials in the world. From a distance, the AK bullet appears to have gone right through the ceramic plate.
You can see it's fragmented. There's lots of small pieces here. If I turn the plate over, and see nothing has come through this side.
The combination of Kevlar with ceramic plate has impressive stopping power. Thick steel would be just as effective, but to get the same level of protection, you'd need steel 12 millimeters thick. That weighs an impractical 18 kilograms, while the Kevlar jacket and ceramic plate weighs in at just 11 kilograms. So light modern body armor is now standard issue and a critical component of a soldier's fighting kit. In ground war, today's warrior is equipped with battle-winning technology. His assault rifle to engage the enemy and advanced body armor to defend him from attack. But other less high-profile technologies have had just as big an impact. 1991, Operation Desert Storm. Coalition forces invade Iraq. For the first time in history, an army uses night vision devices on a vast scale and at every level, from tanks all the way down to the individual soldier. This is a technology that allows the warrior to fully exploit the night. It's a step change in ground warfare. The American soldier can now fight 24/7 using night goggles. This is how the technology works. The goggles absorb minute levels of ambient light from sources such as stars and multiply it. The soldier is able to see images through the lens situated in front of his eyes. And he can use his goggles while looking down a rifle sight at an enemy. It's a similar but superior technology to the night scope used by snipers with police department special response teams.
Lights!
With our own night vision camera, we can follow the action. Through his goggles, this green image is what the soldier sees. But without goggles, this is what his enemy sees.
Night vision equipment has fundamentally changed the nature of war. It has changed the United States Armed Forces from a force that prefers to fight by day to one that prefers to fight by night.
Emerging technologies may prove even more revolutionary, with the goal of one day making the warrior himself obsolete. Half a man's body weight has always been the most the soldier can carry into battle. But now the exoskeleton is under development for the US Army. It's a wearable robot which amplifies the soldier's strength, enabling him to carry 90 kilograms without tiring. The exoskeleton frees the modern infantrymen from a limitation that has stood since the beginnings of warfare. But perhaps technology's ultimate goal will be to completely replace the warrior on the battlefield.
Now you have devices being developed that could go into a building, into an enclosed area, be armed, and be able to take on an enemy combatant without exposing the operator.
The armed, remotely controlled robot opens the door to a more sinister future. A battlefield with the hallmark of science fiction. The Pentagon has determined that by 2015, a full 30% of the US Army's fighting capacity on the ground will be delivered by robots.
In a future where you have our robots fighting their robots, I think that's entirely possible. I think you're going to begin to see that in ground war. I think it's inevitable as that technology improves.
Inevitable, but also controversial.
The idea of an autonomous robot, an autonomous armed robot, being able to move about the battlefield and make its own decisions, that's something a lot of people are leaning away from. They don't want to see it come. There has to be a human in the circuit. There has to be a man who says, this is when you pull the trigger and this is when you don't.
These Marines, training at Fort Irwin, California, are equipped with the latest weaponry technology can provide. Today, they're finding out what awaits them when they're deployed. On today's battlefields, soldiers have to be ready to face war at any level, at any time. Vicious roadside bombs and sniper attacks as they struggle to evacuate the wounded. This is the reality of modern warfare, as brutal as any in the last 3,000 years. Throughout history, men have looked at technology to gain the decisive edge. History also tells us that technology means little without tactics and human judgment. But when all those elements are present, the result can be irresistible. And the armies of the future will depend on that for victory. Fort Sill, Oklahoma. These American gunners are learning how to shoot sophisticated pieces of military technology, today's big guns. Weapons that control the most powerful forces in a fraction of a second. This is the M777 howitzer, part of the US Army's arsenal. When it fires, the temperature inside the gun soars to 2,500 degrees Celsius. Its barrel must contain more than 7,000 times the energy of an AK-47 assault rifle. And its shell travels 3 times faster than a Boeing 747. These core elements of modern artillery and how generals have used them have evolved over centuries of trial and error. Before artillery, there was the bow and arrow. But the bow was only as powerful as the archer.
There's a limit to how much the human body can pull a bowstring, and also the length of the human arm makes the range and strength of discharge essentially very limited.
Artillery took warfare beyond the limitations of a soldier's reach. Its evolution, to begin with, was a constant quest to increase range. This evolutionary journey begins around the year 421 BC. In southern Italy, an ancient Greek force deploys a new kind of weapon against an Italian tribe. It may have been the very first artillery piece used in warfare, the gastrophetes. In essence, it's a mechanical bow that uses tension as the power source. Mechanizing a handheld weapon is how early artillery inventors solved the problem of how to hurl a projectile further.
A normal bow allows you an effective range of about 150 to 200 meters, and the gastrophetes probably increase that to about 250 meters.
That extra 50 meters is vital, especially against an enemy that has no artillery. But to shoot something heavier than an arrow will require more power than the gastrophetes can provide. How this engineering problem is tackled fascinates Ivan Williams. He believes early inventors found the solution by observing nature.
You can see it on big trees when the wind blows and they twist back again. All those fibers, as they twist together, want to come back again. So it's a big spring. You can see it, this tree here that's been split, and the fibers, as I split it, have followed it round in a curve, clockwise curve. So as I move this arm round, all the fibers in that tree, top and bottom, are twisted tight together, and that creates a lot of energy. That's quite difficult to pull round.
The action of twisting the tree stores up energy. This springy sapling points the way to a weapon system that would supersede the gastrophetes. Torsion power, a system that would revolutionize artillery. Wood, fiber, even human hair can be turned into rope, and all can be used as the power source for torsion artillery.
What you have to do is to crank it round, turn it round, spin it round somehow, rotate it so that you're harnessing that inherent natural force control it, and then release it at precisely the right moment.
The ancient Greeks built and tested various torsion artillery pieces in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. British experimental archaeologists have painstakingly reconstructed one of these machines. It's called a ballista, and its capabilities are a step up from the gastrophetes.
We want to throw heavy rocks, 30 pounds and more, 60 pounds. So to do that, a different power source is required. What twists it and stores the power is a steel arrangement up here with a pin that goes through the rope and then is locked into place with this pin here.
Torsion power means that for the first time, heavy stone missiles can be shot over long distances. The Greeks invented artillery technology, but one of the most striking examples of its use in ancient warfare was provided by the Romans. It is the year 73 AD. The fortress of Masada in today's Israel. Rome's 10th Legion lays siege to a force of Jewish rebels holed up in this lofty stronghold. More than 400 meters above the desert floor, Masada appears impregnable. Yet the Romans are able to build a ramp up to the walls and batter their way in. Key to the success of this assault is the way the Romans used torsion artillery.
This is a ballista ball that was found here during the excavations, and they were found scattered all over the area.
And in large concentrations near the breach in the fortress wall at the top of the ramp. The Roman commander, Flavius Silva, seems to have been employing a specific artillery tactic, suppressing fire.
These weapons are not capable of battering down huge 12 or 13-foot thick walls. They're purely designed to keep people off the top of the walls so that they don't interfere with your siege preparations.
Everything was directed to one thing, to bring the battering ram on top of the ramp to those 20 meters, 25 meter wide area where they wanted to breach the wall.
As the huge siege tower with its battering ram inches slowly up the ramp, Roman artillery keeps up suppressing fire, both from ballistas mounted on the siege tower and also from positions at the bottom of the ramp. At Masada, tactical use of ballistas contributes to the defeat of the rebels. Fortress walls are no insurance against this kind of attack. Artillery helps the Romans succeed in a siege. It also plays a vital role in how they build and defend their empire.
Technology reacts to a pre-existing need. The Romans are going to be outnumbered everywhere they fight. If they're on the frontiers in Asia or Northwest Europe, the problem that they're going to face is they're going to have tribal armies that have far more combatants. You can harness technology to equal the odds so that one bolt can go through and kill 6, 7, 8, 9 people and make people so scared that they'll flee.
The Jewish historian Josephus witnessed the terror tactics of Roman artillery at first hand.
When a pregnant woman was struck in the belly on leaving her house, the unborn child was flung 100 meters. So tremendous was the power of that stone thrower.
Artillery in the ancient world had a shock and awe value. The very visceral effects of the impact of projectile fire had a great demoralizing effect on defenders.
Artillery becomes a standard part of many commanders' armory. Victory now no longer depends just on hand-to-hand combat, and killing becomes a less personal matter. Weapons that strike from great distances begin to change the way battles are fought. At this gun factory in Mississippi, engineers are building M777 howitzers. When finished, they will have produced a gun with the power to shoot a shell in excess of 24 kilometers. That's 80 times further than the torsion-powered ballista. Just as engineers today try to maximize the range of modern artillery, so the inventors of the past tried to increase the distance their weapons could achieve. In the 12th century, a new kind of artillery appears on the battlefield, the counterweight trebuchet, the most powerful weapon the medieval world produced, an invention that surpasses what torsion technology had been able to achieve. This is Falster Island, Denmark. Home of the medieval center. Here, men are busy recreating the technology of the past. Engineering trebuchets is one of their specialities. Believed to have originated in China around 400 BC, the early trebuchet seems to have been a simple device like this. Soldiers pulled on ropes to propel a missile from a sling. Knowledge of this technology traveled westwards.
Now, when did it come to Europe? That's a real question. We really just don't know. But in the Crusades, we see the true origins of the trebuchet that we know today.
The trebuchets used in the Crusades are a much more advanced machine that use a mechanical counterweight to shoot projectiles. It is this 12th century version of the trebuchet that experimental archaeologist Peter Vemming wanted to build. This one is 22 meters high and works by releasing a counterweight that can weigh the same as 4 SUVs.
When we build a machine like this one, we lack 1,000 years of experience. That's why you call it experimental archaeology. You have to try and try and try.
Ja, så må jeg gerne begynde at gå.
And you need a lot of manpower. As the men inside the wheels walk, they winch a rope and pulley system that slowly raises the counterweight. Meanwhile, a distant floating target is pushed into place, nearly 400 meters away. The sling on the end of the firing arm shoots a stone ball that weighs 15 kilograms.
Short a few feet, about 20 feet to the right.
Each shot reaches or even goes beyond the target. Lack of a direct hit isn't the drawback it appears. In the Middle Ages, the trebuchet will be either aiming shots at or over a whole castle wall. And trebuchets can also shoot missiles that will shatter on impact into lethal flying fragments. Eyewitness accounts suggest they are also used as a terror weapon.
We get these stories of them launching things over the walls.
Barrels with oil that they could ignite.
The heads of their enemies that they captured to scare the people inside.
We even have sources that tell us that they sent back captured spies, enemies, and you knew they were landed when the cry stopped.
Sometimes, just the threat of trebuchet attack could be decisive.
The best siege is the one that's not fought. If you have this big, huge device that launches things over the walls and into the walls, and the sound is incredible, and fires start, and people are going to say, we've had it. We're surrendering now. It's done.
Fortification engineers have to fight back. Their response is the concentric castle, with its multiple defensive walls of immense width. In the bitter Crusader battles of the 13th century, these castles can resist trebuchet attack. Generals need a new tool in the battle of punch and counterpunch. They find it in the form of gunpowder, one of the most important steps in the evolution of warfare. France, 1324. The city of Metz is under attack from feudal lords armed with a new weapon. A minor battle, but it's the first recorded use of gunpowder artillery.
From then on, we realized that nothing's going to be the same. Gunpowder weapons of large caliber, of small caliber, big, huge guns, smaller guns will all have a great impact. And it's not long before trebuchets are gone. It's not long before archery's gone, crossbows, everything will change.
From its invention in China, knowledge of gunpowder spreads. But it is the marriage of gunpowder with a barrel that made this such an important moment in the evolution of artillery. The problem is how to effectively contain the energy of this propellant inside the gun barrel. The material the barrel is made from is fundamental.
When you're developing something new, you try all sorts of things. You would have tried anything to hand, and of course, at an early stage, you might have tried bamboo.
This 10th century Chinese illustration shows Buddha being attacked by a demon, wielding what could be a gun barrel made from bamboo. Armourer Scott McIntyre has designed his own version of a bamboo gun barrel.
Here I have a typical projectile, which is actually a papier-mâché ball, and behind that there's a gunpowder charge. If that is actually inside a tube, when this charge is ignited, it will build up an awful lot of pressure.
McIntyre's tube will be a hollowed-out piece of bamboo.
That's pretty much there now. There's just a few more small pieces, but yeah, that looks pretty good.
The bamboo barrel needs to be securely strapped down before it's fired.
Projectile will be loaded in down to here. There's a bung in here which will then contain all the gas. As it expands, the projectile will travel down the barrel, exiting the muzzle here, and hopefully reach our target over there.
The bamboo shoots effectively, but even with the target less than 50 meters away, it's not very accurate. It takes 5 shots to get 1 on target. So it's possible that bamboo could have worked as an early gun barrel. Today's artillery barrels deal with incredibly powerful forces. Before any modern artillery piece is delivered to a US Army unit, its barrel has to be taken to the limit. Here, in the middle of the Arizona desert, is where that happens. Yuma Proving Ground.
All stations, stand by for a 5-second countdown. To ground number 45 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Each M777 has to perform at the maximum pressure the gun barrel has been designed for. That's done by loading it at the rear, breech end of the gun and shooting the heaviest, high-explosive projectile with the highest charge at the hottest temperature possible. The barrel can withstand these forces because it's made from a single, solid piece of hardened steel. 500 years ago, the technology of the barrel was more advanced than bamboo, but nothing like as strong as a modern gun barrel. July 1545. The Mary Rose, flagship of Henry VIII, sinks off the coast of England. This cannon is from the shipwreck.
What's really wonderful about this piece is because it sat on the seabed for so long, what's happened is parts of the surface are completely corroding away, revealing the structure inside. It's made of long strips of iron, which we call staves, which you can see along the top here, and they run the whole length of the barrel. And around it, they put rings and hoops of iron.
The corrosion reveals a construction similar to that of a wooden barrel. The kind that would hold dry goods or beer. Both types of barrel relied on hoops to hold the staves together. The gun simply replaced the wooden staves with iron ones. But there is a potential weakness with this method. When this experimental gun fires, explosive gas leaks out through the wooden staves. This kind of flaw was common in hoop and stave iron guns and could be disastrous.
Every shot had the potential to explode the barrel and kill all of those standing around the weapon.
What you're really looking for is a material, a piece of artillery which is a very good, solid, continuous piece of metal.
And the skills to make this kind of metal were to be found in a traditional branch of craftsmanship, bell founding. At this foundry in Loughborough, England, they cast bells in the medieval way, using molten bronze in a mold. In 14th century Europe, this technology is adapted to casting gun barrels.
All you've really got to do is make a different form of mold. You already have the furnace, the technology and the knowledge of bronze to do it.
By the mid-15th century, big guns can be made from a single piece of bronze.
Gunpowder artillery has diversified, both in size and power, in purpose, in metallurgy. People are starting to understand, generals and leaders are starting to understand how valuable guns are.
1453, Constantinople, today's Istanbul in Turkey, a city under siege from the expanding empire of the Ottoman Turks.
By the beginning of the 15th century, the Ottoman Turks were actually behind in gunpowder weaponry. But by the middle of the 15th century, they're above everybody. It's as if they got this incentive to build guns and build them of enormous size.
Big guns that the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II unleashes against the walls of the greatest city in the world. Guns like this.
This great Turkish bombard was cast in 1464 for Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. This is the breech chamber, which contained the gunpowder, loaded in here and held securely by a wooden plug that would be hammered in, would help to build up the pressure. Then the two halves are brought together, and with huge effort, using wooden spikes in these recesses, the barrel is screwed onto the breech.
The breech half alone of this bombard weighs 8 tons.
So the barrel's already been screwed together. It needs to be loaded with one of these massive stone granite cannonballs weighing over 600 pounds.
Pounded for nearly 2 months, entire sections of Constantinople's wall collapse under this sustained bombardment. The city falls, and military leaders around the world take note.
The fall of Constantinople was a major watershed, not only in political and economic history, but in the history of military technology, in that it showed that even the most powerful, thickest walls could be brought low by gunpowder technology.
Artillery once again has the upper hand over fortifications. Yet gun barrel technology hasn't eliminated defects in casting. Gun barrels cast like bells have proved themselves stronger than hoop and stave guns, which had leaked gas, but they still sometimes explode.
Before around 1470, cannons cast in bronze were cast with the breech of the gun, the back of the gun. They were cast vertically, and the breech was at the top and the muzzle was at the bottom. The problem was, when you poured it with the breech up, the impurities tended to gather at the top. So, of course, the impurities, the gaps, were in that part of the gun where the explosion happened. So you always had inherently weak guns. What someone realized you could do is you could turn your cannon over, and you now cast it with the muzzle up and the breech at the bottom. So the best metal, the best casting now, is at the bottom, at the back of the cannon where the gunpowder was.
Guns are now a lot safer for their crews. And while bronze barrel technology leaps forward, so too does gunpowder. This is corned or grained gunpowder, a result of refining the gunpowder production process in France in the 15th century.
When you have grained powder like this, the first grain to ignite generates a flame which shoots between adjacent grains. What this means is you can get powder that burns seriously fast.
The right-hand trail is typical of gunpowder of the early 1300s. The one on the left contains corned gunpowder. Watch what happens when the two trails are lit simultaneously.
Firing! 4, 3, 2, 1.
In just 3 seconds, the corned gunpowder trail burns right through. The primitive gunpowder takes another 38 seconds to burn to the end of its trail.
When you got to corn powder, you had really good high explosive, which you could then develop a better cannon for and get longer ranges and better smashing power.
It isn't just gunpowder that's improving. Now there's a gradual change in what big guns shoot, as stone cannonballs are replaced by iron.
When they did develop the idea of cast iron, it obviously was the ammunition to use, because size for size, cast iron is 3 times heavier than stone.
It's not going to shatter when it hits a hard fortification, and it travels through the air more efficiently.
Heavy metal soon becomes the standard for artillery projectiles.
Get out of work.
Packing all that punch is wasted, though, if it misses the target. So a great deal of this gunnery training exercise concentrates on accuracy.
We're a precise organization, and we deal in precision. We, as artillerymen, measure many aspects of what we do. We measure the muzzle velocity, the speed at which the round departs the tube. We measure the weather so that we take into account for that. We measure the accuracy of the target so that we know exactly where that is.
Stand by. Fire.
This quest for precision and accuracy begins in earnest in the 16th century Italian town of Verona. Poking out of a cannon muzzle, this gunner's quadrant is the product of Renaissance science. It owes its invention to Niccolò Tartaglia, a professor of mathematics.
What Tartaglia did was he took the subject of gunnery from being a bit of a black art. He brought it into the light of Renaissance science, and he tried to see why the cannonball flew the way it did.
Tartaglia wrote down a theory based on a cannon shooting on a flat trajectory with 0 degrees of elevation. And this more than 120 years before Isaac Newton arrives at his theory of gravity.
There was no developed theory of gravity in Tartaglia's time, but what he realized was that the cannonball would start to fall from the muzzle of the gun as soon as it was fired.
He also worked out mathematically the angle of elevation needed to achieve the maximum range. At 0 degrees elevation, a shot from the cannon barrel quickly falls to earth. Raise the barrel to 22.5 degrees, and now the shot travels in an arc, improving the distance it achieves. Double that to 45 degrees, and the shot reaches its maximum range. These calculations inspire Tartaglia to invent an invaluable instrument for gunnery.
The gunner's quadrant allows you to set the angle of the gun to a particular elevation to control the range, and you read it off with a plumb bob. As the barrel is elevated using hand spikes, you'll see the plumb bob move.
Adjusting the wedge at the rear of the barrel results in a few degrees of elevation.
Of course, the plumb bob is really staying vertical because of gravity, and the barrel is moving the scale up and down.
Being able to record the angle of elevation like this helped to improve the accuracy of cannon. It takes the Industrial Revolution to push artillery into its next evolutionary phase. By the 19th century, this leads to the development of machine tools. Now the components of both muskets and cannon can be made with precision. Result, greater accuracy on the battlefield. One of the first times artillery demonstrates its deadlier power is in the American Civil War. Antietam Creek, Maryland. In September 1862, this was the scene of the bloodiest day in American military history. A day when new artillery contributes to the killing and wounding of more than 20,000 young men. A soldier who fought at Antietam witnessed the murderous effect of artillery that day.
A converging storm of iron slammed into the batteries from front and flank. Wheels were smashed, men knocked down, horses sent screaming.
By the middle of the Civil War, we're seeing many rifled guns come into place. Now, what does rifling mean? It's a series of grooves that are cut into the barrel. And those grooves, if you were to look down the barrel, actually turn. Why? We have a new type of projectile.
High-speed camera footage of a modern artillery shell shows how these new elongated projectiles behave in the air. This one's traveling at 2.5 times the speed of sound. A shell that is fired from a rifled barrel spins in flight, and this significantly improves accuracy.
Your projectile is going to come out of this barrel, properly fitted, and it is going to continue in a perfectly straight line to its target as it spins, holding its stability the whole way.
At Antietam, the Union side has a 2-to-1 advantage in rifled artillery. when these more accurate guns engage the Confederate smoothbore pieces in the Dunker Church area of the battlefield, they take a terrible toll.
The Confederate artillerists actually refer to that battle as artillery hell. And this is where the opposition of smoothbore and rifled cannons really shows itself in its deadliest possible form.
A shooting competition can show how a rifled gun can get a critical edge in accuracy over the smoothbore. These targets have been positioned 150 yards from this Napoleon smoothbore gun, an original American Civil War piece. Time to see how these guns perform.
Fire!
The smoothbore's round shot seems to be pretty accurate at this short range. But after 5 shots, there have been no dead center hits. Next up, it's the turn of this 1861 Parrott rifled gun, shooting different elongated shells that spin in flight.
Fire!
Wow.
Move!
After 2 shots, the rifled gun is already demonstrating its superiority.
Fire!
Ha-ha! Right down the ball. Exactly down the center. Perfect dead center bullseye.
At the Battle of Antietam, rifled artillery offers deadly accuracy at a greater range than smoothbore guns.
Civil War battles would have taken place using this type of munition at 600, 700, even 1,000 yards. And at that point, this circle becomes much, much larger, possibly as large as 20 feet, which means these may have missed their target entirely. Think of it this way. You have 2 cannons opposing one another. One is a smoothbore, one is a rifle. They're trying to knock each other's guns off their carriages and silence that artillery piece. This gun could put that gun out of commission, and they could not return fire accurately enough to stop them.
Technology is slowly but surely divorcing soldiers from the act of killing. The Industrial Revolution made artillery deadlier than ever. Now it will change the material the gun barrel is made from. This artillery piece is being decontaminated and cleaned up to go on display at the U.S. Army's Ordnance Museum. An extremely powerful high-pressure washer effortlessly removes the old paintwork, revealing the original metal underneath. Steel.
Steel has immense tensile strength, and you can also heat treat it. You can do all sorts of things to steel to make it the ideal material for building gun barrels.
But up until the mid-19th century, producing a block of steel big enough for a gun barrel and with this tensile strength had defeated weapons manufacturers.
Steel, to start with, is not a metal that can be used for gunnery. They made barrels of steel and they burst.
Then, in 1847, German gunmakers Krupp cast a huge block of steel using nickel and manganese alloys. At last, a type of steel that works as an artillery barrel. Artillery has come a long way and is, in its essentials, very close to this M777 gun. Yet there is one major hurdle to overcome: how to increase the rate of fire. The answer lies in dealing with the problem of recoil.
One. Stop.
Clear?
This machine is testing the gun's recoil system.
One of the major problems with artillery was that every time you fired it, you'd have to put the gun back into position after firing because of the immense recoil that was produced.
When this M777 shoots, massive forces are generated. Without a system to counter recoil, the gun would be jumping several meters backwards. And the rate of accurate fire would be severely slowed. In the 1890s, French military engineers design a truly revolutionary piece of artillery, one that solves the problem of recoil. This is it. The French 75mm field gun. This 1920s model performs ceremonial duties at the U.S. Army's Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
This is the grandfather of all modern artillery.
We wanted a much faster frequency of fire, a more efficient cannon which didn't need to be repositioned after each shot. So it was with this in mind that the French artillery developed a new cannon, the 75.
It has to be done in secret. Germany, a rival military power in the second half of the 19th century, launched an espionage operation to gather information on the gun's designs. But France's director of artillery is one step ahead of them.
He organised a series of firing tests, knowing full well that German spies would be there to see what was going on.
The guns on display are missing one vital component, their hydro-pneumatic recoil system. When the gun fires, oil inside a cylinder is forced one way. Nitrogen gas inside another cylinder flows in the opposite direction, pushing a steel rod that brings the gun barrel back to its starting position. Before the French 75 came along, the average rate of fire for artillery was 10 rounds a minute.
A gun team with the French 75 upped that rate of fire from 10 to 20 rounds a minute. It is a phenomenal gun.
Naturally, the French 75 has a rifled barrel. It's lightweight and mobile, but robust as well, with a steel gun shield to protect the crew.
When we look at this gun, and we consider it against the problems that have faced people over the years of making gunnery, everything is solved in this gun.
At the outbreak of World War I, the French 75 becomes the main field artillery piece for both France and the United States. (1914), the Western Front in France. The way that artillery is now used will make this war different from all others.
Artillery comes into its own in World War I because the pieces are finally big enough to have a real dramatic impact on the battlefield.
Both sides tried the artillery barrage as a means of breaking the stalemate of trench warfare. As a tactic, the barrage was established at least a century earlier in the Napoleonic Wars. But now, guns are massed together in great numbers. They fire further, faster, and more destructively than ever before. This massed bombardment begins and ends at a prearranged time and clears the way for the infantry to go over the top.
Only the artillery can flatten enemy barbed wire. Only artillery can destroy the trenches. Only artillery can destroy enemy artillery. So everything in World War I is going to fall on the artillery.
What began in the Middle Ages with the trebuchet now reaches horrific fruition as artillery is perfected as a proximity weapon.
these shells that they're firing could explode into 1,000 pieces. These shells that they're firing could be airburst shrapnel shells that peppered the ground with burning pieces of lead.
1 million shells were fired in the first week of the Battle of the Somme in 1916. That's 1 million shells fired by the British alone on a 14-mile front. Thousands of Germans were killed in that initial bombardment.
Much of the killing that's done in World War I, the people doing the killing don't know who they're killing or even if they've hit anything at all, because the killing is being done from such a distance.
Battles now take place over kilometers rather than meters. And for the first time in history, artillery is the greatest killer in war. By the end of World War I, 70% of the total casualties have been caused by big guns. And just like their medieval predecessors, World War I generals also realize these weapons can be used to create terror. Germany's Paris gun was a monster. It had a barrel that was 40 meters long and needed a crew of 80 men to fire it. In 1918, it shells the city of Paris from a distance of 121 kilometers.
To build a weapon which will fire a shell weighing about a ton that far consistently is incredible.
To shoot a projectile such a great distance, German scientists have to factor in the rotation of the Earth and the curvature of its surface. That means the highest point of the shell's trajectory will reach the stratosphere. At such a height, air resistance is reduced, which enables the shell to travel further. The Paris gun was roughly twice the size of this massive German World War II railgun. Though initially successful as a terror weapon, it ultimately caused fewer than 900 casualties.
In strategic terms, the Paris gun was a flop. In technical terms, it was a brilliant success.
However, knowledge gained from the Paris gun's performance is invaluable. It leads to Germany's V-2 rocket program in the 1930s.
There's no question that the V-2 rocket was not only the world's first strategic ballistic missile, it's the world's first space system.
The ballistic missile technology pioneered by the V-2 is the catalyst for the Cold War and an arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Missiles, which are in effect self-powered artillery shells, can now travel across entire continents. The science of killing from great distances reaches evolutionary perfection. For artillery, the focus now switches from maximizing range to achieving pinpoint accuracy. Leyte Gulf, the Philippines, October 1944, World War II. Japanese kamikaze aircraft strike the US Navy. US scientists would soon counter this new threat with a clever artillery invention. The radio proximity fuse, the world's very first smart weapon.
Now, the way this thing works is it has a small radio transmitter and receiver built into it on one unit. And it sends out a signal, and when that signal is bounced off a solid object, a receiver will pick that up.
When it's close enough, the fuse triggers the shell to explode. It makes an enormous impact on the US Navy's fight in the Pacific, helping ship guns to shoot down countless enemy aircraft. The radio proximity fuse foreshadows a change in weapons design after World War II. Technological systems now do many of the tasks once performed by human beings. The M777, for instance, has a computerized fire control system. This enables the gunner to electronically calculate all the parameters needed to hit a target. This transformation in weapons is now being taken a stage further in the latest artillery systems. This is the NLOS cannon, a realization of a centuries-long search for utmost range and optimum accuracy, now married to modern war's need to minimize the possibility of human error. It's a prototype 155mm self-propelled gun that could soon be entering service with the US Army. The NLOS is being readied for a day's test shooting at Yuma Proving Ground.
Traditional gun systems had men in the back that had to lift 100-pound projectiles, lift 20 and 30 pounds worth of propellant, had to do it under very arduous conditions, hot, cold, raining, snow, etc. We've now taken those manual tasks and put them into the hands of machinery, which does it repetitively, always doing it right, never having a failure.
Automation is the innovation. Ammunition handling, loading, and the firing of the gun is all done by machine. Where the Paris gun had a crew of 80, the NLOS needs just 2.
These soldiers now have the ability to fight the battle and not be fighting a machine. They're looking at what's going on around them. They're looking at what their commander's asking them to do. They're looking at the terrain. Instead of worrying about, is the next round loaded? Is the next round on board? I have a machine that does that for them.
Artillery has been a part of war for 2,500 years. In that time, its range, accuracy, destructive power, and technological capabilities have reached ever higher levels. Its evolution has helped produce a type of modern war where battles are remote and the killing is faceless. The big gun, it seems, is here to stay. In ground warfare, the mobile forces are at the heart of the fighting machine. What they do best is what they've always done: project power over distance. And reach out faster than infantry. In today's war zones, the American Abrams M1A2 tank is king. It's one of the largest, most complex ground war machines ever to fight. Crushing firepower and formidable armor put it at the pinnacle of the evolution of tank technology.
There are 3 primary factors that influence tank design. They are how big is the gun, how well protected are they, and how mobile are they?
The design of each involves decisions and choices. The decision to give the Abrams a big gun and thick armor makes it a heavier, less maneuverable tank. These trade-offs, so familiar to tank designers today, were already influencing the first war chariot engineers thousands of years ago. (1457 BC), Megiddo in the Middle East. 2 great armies clash in one of history's earliest recorded chariot battles. Egypt's mobile forces under Pharaoh Thutmose III shatter their Canaanite opponents. With speed and daring, they capture nearly 1,000 enemy chariots and score a dramatic victory. The Egyptian chariot is a battle-winning machine in the ancient world. It isn't the first chariot, but in many respects, it's the most successful, combining simple but effective principles. the horse to provide propulsion, the six-spoked wheel, strength and speed, and the bow, firepower. 1,000 years earlier, a predecessor to the Egyptian chariot was this cumbersome battle wagon with 4 solid disc wheels. The Egyptians wanted a different kind of fighting machine, a fast, maneuverable platform from which to fire arrows accurately at enemy infantry. This wish led their chariot builders down a particular design path.
The Egyptian chariot was a fighting vehicle. And as in all fighting vehicles, you want to make them ride smoothly so you have accuracy when firing your missiles. One of the ways the Egyptians achieved a smooth riding firing platform was through the design and construction of the wheels. These included eventually 6 spokes, rims wrapped in shrunken hide, which formed a tire, as well the fighting deck that the warrior and the driver stood on had a springy feel that absorbed a lot of the shock.
Other secrets of their success can be discovered at an unlikely place. A trotting track in Pennsylvania. These racing carts, known as sulkies, are built for speed and mobility by technical designers. Sulky technology is highly competitive. Every detail is constructed to gain an edge on the racetrack. So the sulky is light, under 27 kilograms. And sulkies use frame tubes which are elliptically shaped, like an aeroplane wing, to minimize drag. Lightness is essential for mobility, and at around 35 kilograms, Egyptian chariots are almost as light as the modern sulky. But this comes at a price. The chariot is unarmored, so its fighting crew of 2 men, driver and archer, are completely unprotected, relying only on their speed and firepower.
That's not because they didn't want to protect the individual inside. It's because they felt they didn't need to. Because any chariot was supposed to fight away from the army. They were supposed to be able to pour archery fire on somewhere from a distance.
So platform mobility for the crew is a matter of life and death. Egypt's designers rise to the challenge and pioneer a highly effective design. They set the axle at the very rear of the platform, maximizing its ability to change direction in battle.
These chariots had to be able to turn on a dime, stop on a dime, where other chariots are turning, spinning, and wheeling.
But rapid changes of direction increase the risk of a chariot flipping. Egypt's engineers foresee this danger and give the chariot a wheelbase that's 1 3/4 meters wide, allowing it to make sudden turns without tipping over. Ancient technology has created a highly maneuverable firing platform, perfectly designed to fight at a bowshot's distance from enemy infantry. As chariot tactics evolve, elsewhere, commanders begin to use the machine in different ways. As a result, the chariot itself grows large again. This titanic machine rolls across the Middle East in the 7th century BC. With 4 heavily armed and armored warriors, Assyria's chariot trades mobility for combat power, effective against light infantry.
It was meant to ride directly into the infantry force, to make the driver, to make the riders all part of a military unit to attack.
But in the end, the chariot has too many limitations as a weapon. It can't be deployed on rough ground or in swamps, and it's expensive to build and maintain. By the time of the Roman Empire, the chariot is used only for racing and ceremonies, because armies have discovered a more flexible weapon.
What kills off the chariot is the horse. Now that seems very strange, but horseback riding will eventually mean that the chariot is no longer needed on the battlefield.
So the lightweight draft animal that pulled the chariot is bred larger to carry a mounted warrior. And in 4th century China, a new invention is recorded that will revolutionize the impact of the warrior and his more powerful horse. The stirrup is the device which turns the rider and his mount into a more secure fighting unit. And later, in medieval Europe, armies will use this fact to change battle tactics and transform heavy cavalry into a weapons platform of immense power. (1429), Patay in north-central France. A crucial battle in the vicious 100 Years' War between the English and the French. At Patay, the English infantry are unprepared for an attack. 1,500 heavily armed horsemen of the French cavalry vanguard sweep through their defensive lines and put the infantry to flight. The power of this heavy cavalry assault condemns the English army to total defeat.
This is the age of the knight, the man who rides on his horse, who is armored, who carries a lance, and uses cavalry tactics. He is virtually invincible.
For centuries, the iron stirrup had provided the horse warrior with the critical advantage of balance and leverage in battle. A simple contest demonstrates the difference it makes. 2 horsemen, one equipped with stirrups and one without, fight a duel with clubs. The fighter dressed in green can use his stirrups for leverage to strike his opponent much harder. The horseman in brown can't compete and is easily pulled from his horse. When the iron-forged metal stirrup is combined with a saddle and bridle, it helps create a new kind of warrior. The medieval heavy cavalry is a complete weapons system which rules the European battlefield for 500 years. Tactically, these horse warriors are used as a battering ram. It's believed they attack in a line which sweeps the enemy aside by the sheer force of the charge. The elite of the heavy cavalry are knights, whose status and position is superior to that of the regular soldier. Knights need to buy their armor and horses. In effect, they become the mercenaries of kings and dukes in return for gifts of land. They fight their nobles' wars at home and abroad. The knights create a military culture like the Spartans or the Japanese samurai. And by the middle of the 12th century, knighthood has spread throughout Western Europe. The joust, where knight tilts against knight, is sport in medieval society. But the arena is also the place to practice the tactics for war. The stirrup allows the knight to adopt new fighting techniques.
He could carry bigger equipment. The lance suddenly went from a stick to almost a tree that he could carry, and this was knocking people out of the way.
Next, armor. By the 16th century, every warrior who can afford it is encased in plate armor. And it's his stable platform which allows him to strap on this extra protection. His horse, too, is armored, but metal plate is heavy. There has to be a trade-off. So man and horse sacrifice some mobility in favor of protection. The collective momentum of these horsemen, enabled by the stirrup, changes the tactics of medieval warfare.
A rider can now put the lance under his arm and carry the impetus of the horse and the rider into a blow into an opponent.
Designed for its optimum quality as an armored offensive weapon, this cavalry is the heavy fighting vehicle of the Middle Ages.
The man on his horse, a knight, is absolutely frightening. He was a mobile tank.
A tank for his time. But it will be centuries before man and horse will be truly transformed into mobile machine. (1914), World War I, Northwestern Europe. Two armies face each other immobile across a line of trenches over 800 kilometers long. Out of this massive defensive stalemate will emerge a revolutionary new weapon which will change warfare forever. With both sides locked head-to-head in trench warfare, the Allies are desperate for a solution to the deadlock.
The question is, what kind of machine will enable you to break that trench stalemate?
Enter Winston Churchill, Britain's first Lord of the Admiralty and lover of new technology. Churchill is fascinated by a new innovation that combines speed with protection: armored cars.
Fast motor cars, and it was getting loads of publicity, all things Churchill lived for. So he backed the production of bigger and better armored cars.
The new vehicles defeated German cavalry in the early months of the war when fighting was more mobile, but they struggle in the mud and shell craters of the Western Front. What's needed is a visionary new design.
Trench stalemate brings about one of those light bulb moments in history.
This is the light bulb, a piece of American farm equipment, the tractor, that uses tracks instead of wheels to plow the fields. And so it happened. The British set about building the world's first tank, Little Willie. The first prototype is a primitive metal box riding on imported American tracks. It's the technology of the track that could potentially change the course of the war. But early tests are disappointing. Little Willie's nose sticks out in front of the tracks, so if the tank falls into a trench, it can't climb out. The design proves a dead end. And so Big Willie is created with a revolutionary new system. Its tracks were at the very front of the tank, high enough to grip any obstacle it encounters and climb over it.
The secret of this design is the way the tracks wrap all the way around the body of the tank. The reason for this is that the tanks are expected to cross wide trenches, 9 feet wide in some places, and rough ground.
Big Willie's power to crush defenses is put to the test. It soon becomes clear this juggernaut could be the key to breaching the German trenches. In September 1916, Britain's revolutionary new war machine is unleashed on an unsuspecting enemy.
You've got to imagine a type of machine that nobody had ever seen before. And I don't just mean the Germans, I mean most of the British soldiers on the Somme had never seen anything like this. And they start moving in the pre-dawn mist when you can hardly see your hand in front of your face. It appears to slither along the ground. It's quite bizarre the way it moves.
So far as the Germans were concerned, they called these machines the devil, and the cry soon went up along the trenches, "The devil is coming."
Nothing you shoot at them will stop them, and in your mind, it's you they're coming for.
But once the Germans get over their initial shock, they soon realize the machines are vulnerable. And for the men inside the tanks, the experience is hellish.
Well, I'm in, and there's nowhere to put my hands because I'm between the transmission and the engine, and all that's hot, and I'm already feeling claustrophobic. This is the engine, a mass of red-hot moving parts. You can imagine the heat that that generates, and every crew member is only 2 or 3 feet away from it. The only way to communicate was with one of these. Of course, the crew can't really see what is going on, and they can't really derive the comfort from looking at each other because all they see is an outline in the dark. Their face is covered by one of these chainmail masks, which is some protection against the metal splinters that flake off the side of the tank as soon as it's struck by explosive.
The most difficult thing you have to worry about is plunging artillery fire, because artillery fire can kill a World War I tank. It's only moving 3 miles an hour. It's a big target.
It was only when they started to open up derelict tanks and discovered only the feet and legs of burnt crew members remaining, because the upper part of the torso had completely been incinerated by the furnace, did it dawn on these people that they were part of a new type of warfare that nobody had ever experienced before.
These slow-moving metal monsters are some of the least mobile firing platforms ever invented. On the Somme, many of the tanks get stuck in shell craters or are destroyed by artillery. Only a third even reach the German lines. The tank was designed for a single tactical goal: to break through German defenses, leading columns of Allied soldiers forward. But on the Western Front, it fails to be the hoped-for war-winning weapon. There are numerous mechanical problems. Military planners also fail to see its revolutionary potential. But its time will come. 20 years later, in World War II, the tank will establish itself as a key weapon of war. 1940, Northwestern Europe. In just 10 days, Hitler's panzer tank divisions slice through the Low Countries and France to the English Channel. It's a triumph for the tank. In 2 decades, Germany has turned the tables on the Allies and become the tank superpower of Europe. Ironically, one of Germany's sources of inspiration is a British officer.
Major J.F.C. Fuller, the British Army, is a visionary when it comes to the use of the tank.
Fuller rejects the original World War I concept of tanks leading infantry into battle. In his writings, he foresees a force comprised entirely of tanks attacking in numbers. Fuller's vision is radical, and the enemy is paying attention.
Fuller, ironically, can't sell the idea in Britain. He can't sell the idea in America, but the Germans are reading him.
One German in particular, General Heinz Guderian, the father of German tank warfare. He develops Fuller's idea of an armored division attacking at speed, which will decide battles all on its own. The panzers are unleashed in the attacks on Belgium and France in 1940. The early panzer tanks emphasize speed over armor or firepower. The Germans create a new concept in mobility, where tanks advance at speed with motorized infantry and artillery. Vehicles are on tracks, and each armored unit is linked to the next.
There's one thing that you might not think about, but it's absolutely essential. It's the ability of one tank to communicate with another, so it's the radio.
In 1940, most Allied tanks have radios which can only receive signals. But Heinz Guderian's tanks are all equipped with two-way radios, so commanders can coordinate their forces across a battlefield. Throughout 1940, the German panzers outmaneuver and outfight heavier Allied armor in most tank battles. But then, on the Eastern Front in June 1941, the tables are turned. Out of nowhere, German tank crews suddenly find themselves beaten by a surprising adversary. The chain of events which brings this about begins in the 1920s and on the other side of the Atlantic. American inventor J. Walter Christie is a former racing driver obsessed with speed. His dream is to produce a fast, futuristic tank which can pierce enemy lines and soar over trenches. Christie's tanks are capable of over 100 kilometers per hour, a speed undreamt of by the early tanks, whose track system was far more rigid than Christie's. If they'd moved any faster, they would have injured the crew. Christie invents a truly innovative suspension system.
The secret of it, ever so simple, large diameter wheels, like these, and each wheel on a separate swinging arm pressing against a big spring.
This allows the track to move up and down in response to the terrain and absorb the shocks. Although Christie is an American, his own government rejects his designs in peacetime. So the mercurial Christie seeks other buyers and sells his suspension to the Russians, who use his invention to create the legendary T-34. It is this tank that the Germans come up against on the Eastern Front in 1941. A young Leningrad engineer, Mikhail Koshkin, was put in charge of the T-34 project in the Ukraine. Koshkin's inspired idea was to design a tank that was basic but totally reliable, a workhorse of the battlefield. Confident of its ruggedness, he drives a prototype some 700 kilometers to Moscow for Red Army chiefs to inspect. The T-34 wins their approval, but Koshkin's design made no concessions to crew comfort, and his punishing midwinter journey proves costly.
Koshkin drove this tank throughout the winter. The conditions were so bad and the distance so great that he developed pneumonia and subsequently died.
Koshkin's death doesn't halt the impact of his tank. On the Eastern Front, the pace and firepower of the T-34 takes the Germans by surprise. But something else makes the T-34 special. The design of its protective armor makes it almost invulnerable.
For the first time, it incorporated sloping armor so that incoming fire can ricochet off the armor.
Sloping armor is a groundbreaking concept. The reason the shell ricochets off is that the effective thickness of the armor gets greater as the slope of the armor increases. The earlier tanks were designed more like a box on tracks, with the result that an enemy shell stood more chance of penetrating the armor. But sloping armor gives the tank superior defense. It works like this. When an incoming tank shell meets a perpendicular armor surface, it pierces it and probably kills the crew. If the armor plate is angled at 30 degrees, the shell might bury itself in the armor, but doesn't go through it. But if a shell strikes armor plate angled at 60 degrees, it bounces off, leaving the tank and crew unharmed.
The T-34 is probably the finest example of the use of sloped armor. Here at the front, this very sharp nose. And they achieved this because everything that makes the tank go, and that's the engine, the gearbox, the steering mechanism, it's all at the back.
Sloped armor is now a permanent feature of the modern tank. The nose of the Abrams M1A2 tank is almost horizontal when viewed from the front, presenting a minimal target. Compare this to a World War II British Cromwell tank. The frontal armor is more vertical. But America's current battle tank doesn't rely exclusively on defensive capability. it can also outgun the enemy with its 120mm weapon and thermal sight. In Operation Desert Storm, it was able to engage Iraqi tanks beyond their effective combat range.
We like fighting from far. We can hit from far. No questions asked. They won't know they got hit till they got hit and they're on fire.
The Abrams can also fire with great accuracy at speed. To achieve this, the weapon has to be stable. A design point as true for the tank and its gun as it was for the Egyptian chariot and its archer. The technology needed for the tank's weapon was perfected late in the 20th century. Gun stabilization uses gyroscopes to lock the weapon onto the target, regardless of the movement of the tank's body.
Any type of terrain you can fire on. Doesn't matter how the tank is sitting. The hull can be sitting a certain way, the bottom part of the tank can be sitting a certain way, but the gun is still gonna be leveled out, ready to shoot.
The Abrams uses superior range to outgun opposing tanks. It's a deadly tactic. One which the Germans used in World War II in response to the dominance of Russia's T-34. The Germans designed a rival tank, equipped with a long, highly accurate gun, the Tiger. Its bloody impact on the battlefield was experienced by this former British tank officer. This is the actual Tiger gun which almost killed Peter Gudgeon in the Battle for Tunis in 1943. 5 other soldiers in his troop were killed before the Tiger joined the onslaught.
First we knew about it was when the leading tank on my right blew up in a massive explosion. The commander and his wireless operator were blown out of the top of the turret. The tank was ablaze, an inferno. The next thing I felt was a shot passing right down my tank, just missing my right leg. I felt the draft of it on my right leg. And it crashed through into the engine and set us on fire.
Gudgeon only survived the Tiger's attack by pure chance. A lucky shot from another British tank struck the Tiger in the turret, disabling it. The German crew bailed out and fled.
Hit it anywhere else than where it did, probably wouldn't have made any difference. One amazingly lucky hit.
Soon, the sophisticated firepower of the Tiger and Russia's T-34 will meet head-on in one of the biggest tank battles of all time. The outcome of that showdown will point the way to who will be the ultimate victors in World War II's Battle of the Tanks. (1943), Kursk in Western Russia. One of history's most ferocious tank encounters begins at the village of Prokhorovka, near Kursk. Around 450 German and 800 Russian tanks mass on the brow of a hill.
You are face to face in this incredible encounter. It's almost like hand-to-hand combat with tanks.
Would have been hundreds of German tanks. And every single crewman must have felt they were lining up on him personally.
You don't have time to think. You fire, you shoot, you ram.
The feeling of vulnerability is completely accentuated by this lack of vision. All I can see is the next slope ahead and very little else. They must have felt dreadfully vulnerable.
The losses are phenomenal. You have to imagine men bailing out of tanks that are on fire, and when you bail out, you're going to get shot.
Casualties on both sides are huge.
It's a Holocaust on the tank battlefield, because the next day, there are these hundreds of burning hulks.
The precise figures are disputed, but it's thought over 500 tanks are destroyed that day. Just one engagement in what becomes the biggest tank battle in history. After 7 weeks fierce fighting, the German offensive is halted. The price for the Russians is a heavy one. But though the Russians lose more tanks, in the long run, Kursk proves more damaging to the Germans because of their different approach to engineering.
But if there's one thing that characterizes all these Russian tanks, it's the crude finish, and it's very noticeable here on the T-34's turret. You can see cast markings, weld markings. Now, if you compare the rough finish of this tank with the German Panther over there, the contrast is fantastic. It's as if those tanks were finished off in the Mercedes-Benz body shop. It's a beautifully made machine.
The Panther, with its impressive 75mm gun, is Germany's newest tank on the battlefield of Kursk. Beautiful it may be, but Germany is unable to produce the Panther on an industrial scale. Only around 6,000 of the precision-made Panthers are finished. But Russia's simple, reliable tank technology, built to designer Mikhail Koshkin's blueprint, allows them to mass-produce 40,000 T-34s. The Germans will be pushed back by sheer numbers. For Germany's designers now, the need for fast tanks to conquer new countries has gone. Their revised goal is to defend the fatherland from attack, and so greater protection becomes their priority. The Germans deploy the King Tiger. With almost double the frontal armor of its junior partner, this is the heaviest tank used in World War II. But the thickness of its armor cannot protect the German nation from the Allied invasion forces as they close their grip. In World War II, the tank became a powerful force. Commanders learned to use it as a hard-hitting weapon, whose new mobility transformed the possibilities of warfare. The tank's gun grew in size and killing capacity, and in response, armor got thicker. By the close of the war, the tank had traded Christie's vision of an armored racing vehicle for an all-round fighting machine. And the symbol of that success was the T-34. But in the decades that follow World War II, tank designs built for set-piece battles find themselves facing a different kind of enemy, a different kind of tank killer. Which prompts some to ask if the main battle tank might disappear, like the Chariot, into history. (1973). A surprise attack by Arab states on Israel ignites the Yom Kippur War. Israel's tank forces, which seemed invincible, suffered devastating losses. For 40 years, the most potent force against a tank has been another tank. But this time, Egypt's soldiers deploy an unexpected, deadly weapon.
There was an introduction of something that changed the equation on the battlefield, and that was this light, portable, anti-tank weapon.
Israel's tanks are destroyed by soldiers equipped with missiles that can be carried in a suitcase, and by rocket-propelled grenades. Anti-tank explosives have been around since World War II as one way to penetrate improving armor. But this is a major escalation, a portable, guided delivery system with a deadly warhead. Known as a shaped charge, the warhead is designed to cut like a knife through the thickest tank armor.
This is a shaped charge. The top part here is filled with explosive.
This is designed so that when the explosion travels down here, this copper actually turns to liquid and is concentrated on a point down here. And that allows the liquid metal to actually puncture straight through the target.
It will completely carve up the crew, or it will set off ammunition fires, which in turn, of course, will produce internal explosions, which will completely finish them.
But the punch of the rocket-delivered shaped charge will soon be opposed by a counterpunch. Weapons designers search for a type of armor which can resist it. 1969, one German armor scientist, Manfred Held, stumbles across an amazing discovery while he's conducting research in the Middle East. He's using the wrecks of damaged tanks to test his shaped charge warheads.
I was alone there. I was a project leader. I made my own pictures from every test.
He detonates his shaped charges on the tank turrets, fully expecting them to perforate the armor and pass right through the turret. But this doesn't happen. And when Held reviews his film footage, he notices a much bigger explosion than he expected. On investigation, he discovers the shaped charges have detonated unspent cartridges inside the turret. Held comes to realize these cartridges have neutralized the effect of the shaped charges.
So the stronger reaction have reduced the penetration capability.
Held has discovered a totally new way to armor a tank: explosive reactive armor. On the Israeli Blazer tank, around 40 steel plates containing explosive are fitted at the most vulnerable points: the front arc and the turret. If the tank is hit, a plate will detonate, neutralizing the shaped charge and leaving the tank unharmed. We can see how it works by comparing the effects of a shaped charge on a tank with and without the protection of explosive reactive armor. Two towers of steel represent the armor of the tanks. A shaped charge is placed on top of each tower. There will be two explosions, one with and one without protection. A sheet of plastic explosive is placed between the shaped charge and one of the steel towers at an angle to simulate the position of a plate of explosive reactive armor on a tank.
When the shaped charge is fired, it will detonate the sheet of plastic explosive and hopefully disrupt the blast. Then we can compare the number of steel plates penetrated with the protection of explosive reactive armor and without. Firing in 3, 2, 1, firing! Firing! There was a huge release of energy in both those two explosions. This first stack, we didn't have anything between the shaped charge and the top plate.
The shaped charge has left a neat entry hole, and the blast has penetrated almost 6 plates. That's 15 centimeters of steel.
It's actually gone almost all the way through it. If we compare that to the stack that was protected by our simulated explosive reactive armor, the entry on the top plate is a lot messier. A lot of this seems to have been disrupted.
But the shaped charge has only gone fully through 3 plates, so the explosive reactive armor has reduced the impact by almost half.
So had this been an attack on a tank, I think the protection offered by the explosive reactive armor could well have saved the crew's lives.
This technology is now used by most countries that build tanks. Israel's army was the first to adopt the new armor, and that was just the beginning for their crew safety program. Since their experience in the Yom Kippur War, the Israelis have prioritized tank crew protection. Because for them, tank design has political and economic dimensions. The Merkava tank was designed after the deaths of 2,500 Israelis, mostly tank soldiers, in the 1973 war. For Israel, with a small population, the loss of a highly skilled tank crew outweighs the loss of the tank itself. Soldiers are precious, and retraining costs high. So with the Merkava, firepower and mobility come second and third. Unlike all other main battle tanks, the Merkava's engine is in front, which puts an extra barrier between the crew and incoming fire. The tank's shape, streamlined and flat, makes it difficult to hit. Even the turret is designed to present less of a target.
The turret is basically on the top. It's very narrow, so it'll be very, very hard to hit. As you can see, it's shaped as an arrow to the front.
If the tank is hit, soldiers have a greater chance of survival because ammunition and flammable liquids are kept separate from the crew area. And they can make a rapid exit through a rear-facing escape hatch.
What happens, I give my crew just a command. They all get out of their cells and just come out of the tank from this rear hatch. We can open it from inside. It just opens on the top and on the bottom. The whole crew gets out and we go to a safer spot.
The Merkava represents the pinnacle of crew safety for a battlefield that's become more lethal for the tank. Because of that vulnerability, weapons designers now pursue a strategy of designing different weapons platforms for contrasting types of warfare. The main battle tank remains a dominant force. The American Abrams tank played a crucial role in ground war offensive during both Gulf Wars. The Abrams M1A2 is the essence of a modern heavy tank, the end result of a century of tank evolution. Its massive 120mm gun has a laser range finder. And it's tough, protected by multiple layers of steel and ceramics with an option of reactive armor.
Abrams tank is the most powerful battle tank in the world right now. There is no tank that can match an Abrams in open battle.
There are inevitably consequences for being one of the largest tanks ever to fight. At 63 tons, the Abrams weight is colossal, which means it drinks fuel at over 4 liters per kilometer. But despite these logistical problems, the prospect of conducting head-to-head battles between armies without tanks is unthinkable.
If you're projecting the possibility of a war with, say, an enemy like North Korea, that will be a conventional war. And you'll need an Abrams. You've got to have an Abrams.
Current conflicts, though, are more frequently asymmetric and fought against insurgencies, an invisible enemy. And the theater of war is often urban, where a tank's size and immobility makes it a target.
Definitely the place that is the most dangerous for using a tank would be an urban environment. The most restrictions, the most opportunity to get behind you or over you to attack you.
Because of the tank's limitations, weapons designers have produced alternative machines. The Striker, used in Iraq since 2003, is an armored personnel carrier with wheels instead of tracks. It's used as a battlefield taxi, delivering troops with speed and mobility. Its firepower and protection are inferior to the Abrams, And in Iraq, it was shown to be vulnerable to roadside bombs. But the trade-off is it weighs less than a third of the battle tank, so it can be flown easily to trouble spots. And in urban wars, it's far more mobile.
A striker can go down streets that an Abrams tank is too large to get through, because the tank is so big and so powerful.
The Striker is at the end of a long tradition of lighter weapons platforms which have evolved in response to the demands of the battlefield. From the iconic Jeep, transport backbone of the US Army in World War II, to today's Humvee, a hybrid of troop carrier, ambulance, and automatic weapons platform. Equipped with a roof-mounted M2 50 caliber machine gun, its role has expanded into urban combat. Strikers and Humvees can use their superior mobility to escape the enemy's guns. But because those guns are becoming more potent, the most effective way to avoid being hit is to avoid being detected in the first place.
New rule of warfare is, if you can see it, you can hit it. If you can hit it, you can kill it. Doesn't matter what it is. So that makes the importance of not being seen much greater than it ever has been in the past.
And so designers of future weapons technology are investigating a new dimension: invisibility. New weapons technologies, from camouflage through to stealth, are now being researched and tested. These Leopard 2 tanks from the armored battalion of the Danish army are on their way to Helmand province in Afghanistan. But before they leave, they're given a new skin to disguise their presence from the enemy. Anti-tank weapons use thermal targeting to home in on a tank's telltale heat signature and kill it. This camouflage helps disguise that signature. The camouflage combines layers of high-tech materials which reflect and conceal the heat and radar signals. Only one of these Leopard tanks is using camouflage. A thermal camera highlights their different heat signatures. The color white is hot. The first tank has no camouflage, and its tracks and hull are clearly hotter.
Most of the tank will not be visible on a thermal imager, so you will be able to get up and get the first shot before they even recognize you.
Tank disguise still has many challenges to overcome. But it may hold off the day when the tank is replaced as the bringer of mobile firepower to the battlefield. A battlefield which is always changing and where the tank must always adapt to survive. Since the pharaohs, the wheels of war have turned beneath the most destructive fighting machines the world has ever seen. And thanks to technology's dynamic advance, the mobile forces have evolved to strike out at high speed across great distances. Over thousands of years, these machines have helped drive the changing tactics of battle as commanders have responded to their achievements. The future of ground warfare will continue to be shaped by that awesome combination of speed, armor, and firepower. Ground warfare is about defending or capturing land. The terrain itself plays a central role. Both in attack and defense, a commander must use the landscape to his advantage. A principle that goes right back to ancient warfare. The legions of Rome operated in all kinds of terrain, and their engineers were some of the most successful in military history. It is the year 122 AD. On what is today the border between England and Scotland, the Roman Emperor Hadrian builds a wall to defend his empire's northern frontier. A construction with all the hallmarks of Roman engineering. It takes advantage of a natural rocky outcrop in the landscape. It's 118 kilometers long and reinforced with fortresses. A massive building project, but Hadrian has clear military objectives.
If you have a long frontier and you don't have adequate number of people who can be deployed, then you build a wall, and that keeps the enemy out and it can be guarded at much less cost.
Just as the Great Wall of China began more than 700 years earlier, Hadrian's Wall sends a powerful message to enemies, one that rams home the might of imperial Rome. But engineering in warfare is as much about offensive measures as defensive walls. The Romans, like generations of soldiers that followed them, are expert at using the pick and shovel in attacking operations.
If you have a wall, there's only 3 ways to get past it. You go over it, you go under it, or you go through it. And there's a science that will develop to do that.
The Roman method of defeating defensive walls is famously seen in action at Masada in Israel. The capture of this fortress in the year 73 AD reveals the way Roman engineers use industry, ingenuity, and careful planning to clinch victory. Masada has been chosen by Jewish rebels for their stand against the Romans because of its inaccessible location.
Masada is an excellent example of an ancient fortification. In other words, taking a naturally very strong natural feature, this enormous mountain really behind me, and then fortifying it.
A great piece of defendable terrain, giving a huge height advantage to the rebels. But Roman engineers examine the landscape, searching for weaknesses in the rebels' position, and devise a plan to defeat them. They begin by building 8 fortified camps positioned to surround Masada. Each one a base from which to launch siege operations. Here, facing the southern end of Masada, one camp is deliberately built upon a cliff top.
This is actually the only place that you can see what's going on top of Masada.
It performs an important surveillance role. All these camps are part of a wider offensive strategy that involves a 5-kilometer-long encircling wall. The circumvallation. It measures nearly 2 meters wide and 3 meters high all the way round. And its purpose is clear.
It stops anybody going in, stops anybody going out, and to all the defenders on the top, it is a stone noose has been put round them and there is no escape.
It was sort of a statement. We built, we surrounded you, you're doomed.
This massive construction effort might intimidate the rebels, but it can't defeat them. For that, the Romans need something far more difficult to engineer.
The only way that the Romans could really get to grips with the defenders at Masada was by constructing an enormous assault ramp.
Before building their assault ramp, they first need to choose a suitable location. They identify the one chink in Masada's armor, a natural spur of land on the western side of the fortress that the Romans reckon can be the basis of their ramp. Even so, they still have to construct a ramp more than 200 meters in length. Its gradient has to be shallow enough to enable an armored siege tower to be dragged up to the fortress walls. Once at the top, a powerful battering ram housed inside the tower will smash through the walls. Roman artillery will continually rake the tops of the walls with stone shot to protect the ramp construction teams. But the chief problem is engineering a ramp with the stability to support the siege tower. Physical clues to how the Romans achieved this can be found today.
Now, these bits of timber here have been here for nearly 2,000 years. They were laid by Roman legionaries when they were building this immense ramp behind us. We think they're some form of reinforcing, rather like we have steel rods in concrete today to hold that together. So these timbers were driven in on horizontal layers to try and keep the ramp in one compact mass.
Though it's difficult to determine exactly how this was done, it's possible they dug terraces into the sides of the natural spur. With these stable foundations in place, prefabricated wooden boxes, supported by reinforcing timbers and filled with rubble, can be stacked up. Now, the ramp is strong enough to bear the weight of the siege tower. Roman engineering neutralizes Masada's height advantage, and the attack on the walls also exploits a flaw in the design of this mountain fortress.
The towers at Masada do not project out beyond the wall line. This does not allow for any flanking fire. It reduces their defensive capability quite substantially. So what we have at Masada is essentially a passive defensive system.
Defenses that cannot withstand this kind of planned attack. From 50 BC to 150 AD, Roman engineering, supported by artillery, played an important role in the empire's expansion. Many centuries will pass before defenses come up with an effective counter to the systematic siege operation. The Middle East in the year 1188. Saladin, the great Muslim leader, has inflicted a crushing defeat on the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin. But to take control of the Holy Lands, Saladin needs next to drive them from castles such as Crac de Chevalier in today's Syria. These castles allow the Crusaders to maintain a foothold in the region.
One thing that we have to remember is the number of the Crusaders in the greater Syria region was minuscule, and they were holding much larger land that they could defend.
Like Hadrian's Wall for the Romans, castles such as Crac compensate for this lack of manpower. Their design had evolved during the Crusades of the 11th and 12th centuries.
We have 150 years of struggle between the two sides, attack and counterattack, and they are learning from each other.
This fusion of ideas means that engineers work out the best ways to fortify their castles. The result is a new kind of defensive engineering, far superior to the passive system at Masada.
What happened in the second half of the 12th century and the first half of the 13th century is that these castles became much more massive. The whole structure tended to become taller, bigger, broader.
Every aspect of Crac has a specific purpose, based on a concept called defense in depth. The first line of defense relies on towers designed to be strong enough to mount heavy trebuchets on top. This new kind of counterweight artillery can strike an attacking force more than 350 meters away. More than this, these towers deliberately project outwards, enabling lines of fire to both the front and flanks. The castle engineers want to build in more than a single defensive system. Here, one of the ways they do this is through concentric walls.
Concentric walls on a castle mean an outer defense and an inner defense. And you can, in fact, have an outer, a middle, and an inner. You can take this thing quite a long way. It gives you defense in depth.
Defense in depth also relied on defense in height.
One of the vital features of concentric design is that your inner fortifications, your inner line of wall, has to be higher than your outer, so that if the enemy does take the outer wall, they cannot use it as a fortification for themselves. They're completely overlooked by archers and defenders on the inner wall.
But if the worst happens and the entrance is breached, this type of castle had fallback lines of defense. At Krak, the passageway into the castle is engineered to provide a series of killing zones. With the aid of a paintball gun, David Nicole will show how. The man in the crash helmet represents an attacking soldier who's broken into the castle. He will be Nicole's target. Advancing up the passageway, the attacker is going to be exposed through openings known as murder holes.
It's directly above the main entrance passageway, which runs beneath us from the main gate to the interior of the castle. Right. If the defenders fail to get the attacker during the first opportunity to shoot, they'll have plenty of others. If I haven't stopped them then, I have one last chance.
These murder holes demonstrate how multiple defensive positions are the core of these castles' designs. And they prove themselves in battle. In 1188, the Crusaders at Krak successfully beat off the attack from Saladin. Defense in depth will be an important part of military engineering right up until the present day. In the fast-moving battles of modern war, there is often no time for the building of fortifications. Yet the defensive principles of Crusader castles still apply. This is Iraq in 2004, the fight for Fallujah. US Marines are coming under heavy fire from Iraqi insurgents. Both sides improvise as the battle develops.
What's gonna happen? M16s, 240. We're gonna pop up. We're gonna do 5 seconds of suppression. Ready, set, go, hose up.
In a constantly shifting battlefield, rooftop brick walls offer both defensive protection and a height advantage to these soldiers. From up here, they can shoot down onto the insurgents' position. But Fallujah's buildings give advantages to both sides.
Every single street is effectively its own fortress dominated by its own miniature castles of rubble or whatever. So from a command and control point of view, it makes it incredibly difficult.
Command and control is key to success in battle. And the course of military history has shown that it's affected by many factors. Terrain is one. The impact of innovations in weaponry is another. In the 14th century, the advent of gunpowder artillery would transform the way battles were fought. Military engineers had to adapt to this powerful new threat. 1480, southeastern Europe, the island of Rhodes, today part of Greece. An army of Ottoman Turks bombards the fortress of Rhodes with the most powerful gunpowder artillery the world had ever seen. Medieval walls are not constructed to withstand this kind of attack. A small force of Christian Hospitaller knights hold firm against the Muslim onslaught. After a brutal siege lasting 2 months, the Ottomans withdraw. The Hospitallers prevail, but only just. And their leader, Pierre d'Aubusson, knows the Ottomans will be back. D'Aubusson is an early witness to what heavy artillery can do to medieval stone walls. He realizes that Rhodes' defenses need to be re-engineered.
Pretty much the next morning, Pierre d'Aubusson gets up and says, whoops, we didn't win because our walls were invulnerable. And so he starts to rebuild them. They rethink the whole principles of fortification. No longer do they feel that tall, thin walls will be effective against gunpowder weapons.
Walls are increased from 2.5 meters to 8 meters width. And a new defensive feature appears called a bastion. It's a massive fortification that projects out from the main wall, enabling more lines of fire against attackers. Several bastions are built on Rhodes, each one a kind of giant gun turret, bristling with cannon.
The guns had become so big and so powerful, 18, 20 tons, 12, 14 feet, that the Hospitallers had to build their own firing platforms, these enormous platforms, just to counter the recoil of them.
These gun platforms are just one example of how they plan to deal with the next Ottoman attack.
It's kind of odd to walk around the walls of Rhodes and you don't see anything that is the same as another feature. It's almost as if they're experimenting with everything that anybody thinks of that might preserve the city from the guns of the Ottoman Turks.
This curious construction, for instance, is called a caponnier.
It's a thin gun gallery that sticks out right at the sharpest angle of the walls. This could be filled with smaller guns and could be fired down both sides of the moat to cover any attacks made on it or on the walls next to it.
And this freestanding wall, called an outwork, is one of a number created by d'Aubusson during his widening of the moat to provide additional defensive barriers.
Instead of just digging 50 meters of moat, he leaves this outerwork in the middle of the moat. Now the attackers have to go down one side of the moat, defeat the outerwork, go down the other side of the moat, and now they get to attack the walls.
In June 1522, the Ottomans are back. Tens of thousands of soldiers, led by their Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, lay siege to the fortress. Facing them, a Hospitaller force of barely 6,000.
I don't think that anything like the 1522 siege had been seen in warfare ever before.
Wave after wave of Ottoman assaults break upon the newly strengthened walls of Rhodes.
The Knights Hospitaller would kill 1,000, and they'd look up, and there'd still be 20,000 because another 1,000 had arrived from Turkey. There's one eyewitness, Jacques de Bourbon, and he talks about the blood being so thick on the ground from so many Ottomans being killed that you can't see actual dirt. It's just blood.
Though the Ottomans lose thousands trying to crack Rhodes' new defenses, their attacks keep coming. After 6 months of siege, the Hospitallers get to a point where their own losses force them to surrender.
In the end, Suleiman the Magnificent, the one who wins, this young sultan, admits to the Hospitallers that he had lost 103,000 men to take Rhodes, and that he'd gladly lose 103,000 more.
Despite the Hospitallers' defeat, the strength of Rhodes' defensive engineering innovations had been vividly demonstrated.
Pretty soon, all throughout Europe and all throughout the Middle East, people are building forts just like the Hospitallers had built in Rhodes.
Rhodes is part of an explosion of ideas on how to combat gunpowder artillery. In Italy, engineers build star-shaped fortresses with triangular bastions designed to give defensive crossfire. And they experiment with earth as a backing to masonry walls. One section of this simple brick wall has been backed with earth, more than tripling its width. The remainder has no reinforcement. It's going to be shot at with this reproduction cannon from point-blank range. The results are easy to see. After several shots, the unreinforced wall is near collapse.
Playing through.
Now, the cannon will be trained on the earth-backed section of brick wall. The earth backing makes a big difference.
It's amazing the difference between the stone here, where there's no earth behind it, and here where addition of earth has acted as a shock absorber. Here we have no penetration whatsoever. The wall is solid.
Experiments like these show that wide walls of brick and earth are the way forward. Defensive engineering will soon reach a new level of sophistication. 1698, Eastern France. Construction is underway on a fortress that represents the zenith of defensive design, Neuf-Brissac. Today, Neuf-Brissac is a quiet little town, close to the border with Germany. Its defenses were designed by a brilliant French military engineer, Sébastien Vauban, a nobleman schooled in the art of fortification.
Everybody learned the rudiments of fortification. They learned it because the nobility was still the warrior class, and fighting in this time had to do with knowing the techniques of fortification.
Vauban's talents, though, set him apart. His rise came at a time when France was at war with virtually every European state on its borders. And he built or upgraded some 160 fortresses. At the core of his defensive engineering is the Italian star fortress design. But Neuf-Brissac shows how Vauban shapes the landscape to the defender's advantage.
Right now, I'm walking just outside Neuf-Brissac. What's really amazing about it is that from where you are right now, you can't even see all the ditches. There's countryside all around, but it just looks like we're walking on a slightly hilly terrain, when in fact, we're only 20 meters away from all the fortification ditches.
They're designed to be hidden from view, and high ground has been cleverly created.
The ground is gently sloping upwards. It was calculated very carefully by Vauban so that the height advantage would still belong to the people inside the fortifications. Suddenly, here you are, and you have the counterscarp, you have the ditch, you have this vast protection of the fort. At the time, all you would have seen from this point of view was earth and the barrels of guns and cannons pointed at you from soldiers positioned on the ramparts.
To threaten the main fortress walls, an attack first has to get past these outworks. What were experiments at Rhodes nearly 200 years earlier have now become a standard fortification technique. And guns inside the bastions defend the ground immediately in front of the main wall.
What that means is that one bastion covers the other one. They each shoot crisscross style so that there's no cover along the wall.
From inside a bastion, it's possible to see what these structures give the defenders. Any attackers down here in the ditch can be caught in a killing zone. Though Neuf-Brissac is never tested in battle, many fortresses built on Vauban's model are. And not just in France. Fort McHenry at the mouth of Baltimore's harbor. In 1814, its American garrison successfully withstand a massive British naval bombardment, inspiring the poem, The Star-Spangled Banner.
Fort McHenry is very much indebted to the Vauban style and the French influence. In fact, Fort McHenry was built by 3 different French military engineers.
McHenry, like Neuf-Brissac, has a star shape with bastions at each point, low earth-backed walls, and outworks.
During the British bombardment, they fired over 1,800 heavy 13-inch, 200-pound exploding shells at Fort McHenry. So you can imagine those bombs raining down and exploding over the fort. But the design of the fort and its thick, heavy walls helped shelter the men.
Despite the ferocity of the bombardment, the garrison holds out. Eventually, they drive the British ships away. McHenry's successful defense owes much to Vauban. Yet Vauban's engineering, like that of the Romans, is as much about attacking a fortress as defending it. These 17th century documents set out techniques a general should use in conducting a siege. Again, digging is vital. A series of zigzag and parallel trenches protect attackers so they can bring artillery close enough to smash through defensive walls. And, like his Roman predecessors, Vauban shows that engineering can give a general command and control in both attack and defense. In the centuries that follow, military engineering will evolve again as it adapts to far-reaching changes in weapons technology. July 1864, the American Civil War. The town of Petersburg, Virginia, is besieged. The age of trench warfare has begun. Confederate General Robert E. Lee has built a 16-kilometer-long defensive line to guard Petersburg. Facing him are the forces of Union General Ulysses S. Grant. Both sides are dug in.
The increased lethality of the battlefield because of rifled weapons caused first soldiers and then later their generals to alter the ground at every opportunity. Dig that field fortification, get your people underground so that the attacker had to come at you from a position of disadvantage.
High stone walls have disappeared. Defensive warfare relies now on digging down into the ground. As the attacker, Grant has to break through the Confederate trench lines. One of his officers, Henry Pleasants, a former mining engineer, comes up with a clever plan.
He was indicative of a new kind of soldier that really represented the popularization of scientific and technical knowledge, and were able to apply that during the war.
Pleasance proposes a secret engineering operation. He will dig a tunnel under the Confederate line and blow it up from below.
Pleasance needed to make sure that the end of the tunnel was in exactly the right place. If it had been too far in front of or behind the Confederate lines, the effect of the explosion would have been minimal.
Like modern surveyors, he uses a theodolite to measure the angles between various points on the battlefield, enabling him to then calculate the exact length of tunnel that has to be dug. He determines it needs to be 156 meters long. And with that distance, there is the problem of how to ventilate the far end of the tunnel.
As the miners continued to work, as they breathed out their carbon dioxide without air coming in to the tunnel, they would have quickly suffocated. Pleasant's solution was quite magnificent in its elegance and simplicity.
First, carbon dioxide will be removed by sinking a shaft into the tunnel near its entrance. At the bottom, a continuously burning fire will draw the stale air up and out. And to avoid drawing attention to the smoke, Pleasance would have his men burn decoy fires along their lines. Meanwhile, fresh air will be sucked into the miners at the tunnel face through a wooden ductwork.
Here's our construction of the ductwork that the air went into where the soldiers were working.
This modified aquarium tank shows how Pleasant's system works.
This Pyrex 2 represents the ductwork that they built. The Union lines would be over here, Confederate lines to the left, and this Pyrex 2 represents the vertical shaft that Pleasance constructed.
And this burner is the fire Pleasance builds. Ross then fills the mock-up tunnel with smoke to represent the stale air. Once the burner is lit, the smoky air is warmed and rises up and out of the funnel. The moving flaps show that fresh air is being drawn in, keeping the Union soldiers alive. After 34 days of work underground, the digging is complete. Union troops stand ready as the final preparations are made at the tunnel face.
At the end of it, in kind of a T shape, they had two 30-foot galleries where they would store 4 tons of black gunpowder.
A huge quantity of gunpowder placed right beneath the Confederate line. Early in the morning of July the 30th, 1864, the fuse is lit.
There was this tremendous explosion, almost like a geyser going off.
Body parts, wagon wheels, cannons, huge pieces of dirt the size of a house began to rain down. The Confederate lines that had stood seconds before were now obliterated, and what was left was an enormous crater.
278 Confederates are killed in the explosion. But a poorly directed follow-up assault that sees Union troops going right into rather than round the crater ends in a failure to break through and a retreat back to their own line. Yet the massive crater made by the explosion and Henry Pleasant's tunnel shows how the engineer can pinpoint a problem and find a solution. Barely 50 years later, this kind of underground operation will be taken onto a whole new level. Spring 1916, World War I, the Verdun battlefield in France. German and French armies are locked in a bitter struggle. Both sides dig tunnels under the strategically important hill of Vauban. Simon Pepper, a historian of military architecture, has come to investigate. This is an entrance to one of the tunnels on the French side. Underground, they're still part of a railway used to transport excavated earth from the mine face.
Below the hill of Vauban, there is an absolute mass of tangled network of tunnels, each one trying to get under the enemy's tunnels so that they could destroy them or break into them and kill the miners.
This map shows the French tunnel network on the south side of the hill, the German tunnels to the north, and the village of Vauban in between. In total, more than 17 kilometers of tunnels are dug. On the French side, soldiers leave the tunnels at the end of a day's shift. But for the Germans, there is no respite.
Their men lived in the tunnels for weeks at a time, lodging in little dugout chambers off the main galleries.
Signs of the Germans' presence are everywhere. Here, carved into the wall, the symbol of an iron cross.
All warfare is horrible, but the underground war of mining and countermining must be amongst the most horrible in most people's imagination, where you're operating in the dark, in foul conditions, running with water, trying to work quietly so that you weren't overheard by the enemy, at risk either of being blown to eternity or suddenly find your workings invaded by fighters armed with clubs and knives for a grim fight in the dark.
This underground warfare is made more deadly by the use of a new weapon.
The big difference by the time we get to the First World War is that high explosive has become available.
This early form of high explosive has 10 times the destructive power of gunpowder. At Vauban, there are more than 500 separate underground explosions. The top of the hill is literally blown away. The French eventually prevail, but all that remains of the village are a few brick foundations. Underground warfare would be used sporadically in later 20th century conflicts in Korea and Vietnam. In Vietnam, for instance, the Viet Cong make very effective use of their Cu Chi tunnel system. They build an extraordinary 250 kilometers of tunnels that serve as bomb shelters, arms stores, and a launch pad for surprise attacks against American forces. In World War I, though, engineering defenses is as much about shaping the battlefield above ground as below it. The trenches dominating the Western Front have a new, highly effective barrier in front of them: barbed wire. This late 19th century farming invention was quickly seen to have military potential. It gives a defender the advantage by hindering an attacker's advance or funneling him into killing zones. And because it's mostly empty space, it's difficult to destroy.
You walk up to the barbed wire, and there's no way to get past, and there's really no way back either. And the enemy machine guns, which are trained on you, are going to cut you down.
At the Battle of the Somme in 1916, British artillery tries to cut paths through the German barbed wire before their infantry attack. They use air-bursting shrapnel shells against the wire. But it's tougher than they anticipate.
This represents a shrapnel shell, in as much as shrapnel shells were used to attack barbed wire entanglements.
Steel balls, backed by a plastic explosive charge, will mimic the airburst of the shrapnel shell.
If you were to be bold enough to lie there, I can guarantee you're going to be seriously dead. But you're not a barbed wire entanglement, and the mechanics of it are very different.
It explodes barely a meter above the wire.
Well, as we can see, The wire is intact. There are 6 strands, and there were 6 strands before we fired it.
The explosive has penetrated the wood, but done little damage to the barbed wire. And this is what the British infantry found to their cost when they attacked the German lines at the Somme.
On the northern sectors of the battlefield, perhaps about 2/3 of the battlefield, the barbed wire was not cut. Barbed wire was perhaps the most crucial element in predicting the outcome of a battle.
Barbed wire's toughness helps establish it as a vital defensive tool in World War I. And it has played an important part in many battles since. Its modern incarnation, razor wire, is still a common feature on today's battlefields. Yet barbed wire was not the only engineering innovation of World War I. For the defense of some strategically important towns in France, new kinds of fortresses are built. Fort Douaumont helped defend the town of Verdun, a vital point of the French army's line as it stood on an important crossing of the Meuse River. Douaumont's design is a response to the now increased power and range of artillery.
Most of these fortifications are underground, and the tops of them are protected by earth to absorb the shock and the concussion of artillery blasts.
But earth is not the only layer of protection at Douaumont. The original fortress had been built in the 1870s. Just 30 years later, the French realize it's outdated.
We're on the south face of Fort Douaumont, and what we can see here is very clear evidence of the upgrade that took place shortly before the First World War. The light-coloured stone is the original design for the fort. The grey material, the concrete here, is the massive thickening that took place in response to the added power of artillery.
Douaumont is part of a radical rethink of what a fortress should do.
The fortress system at Verdun is not one fort, and it's not one gigantic set of walls that connect one another. What it is instead is a system of large forts and smaller forts, what the French called ouvrages, that are designed to protect one another and cover one another.
A network of 19 fortresses defend Verdun. This system, as with the mutually supporting bastions of a Vauban fort, offers overlapping zones of defense. Each fort can neutralize an attack by using artillery to lay down a wall of defensive fire.
The big gun here, the 150mm, was capable of firing some miles and would defend the neighbouring forts by sweeping the ground in front of them and sometimes even sweeping the tops of them.
And Douaumont, in turn, can be supported by forts on either side of it.
The loss of a fort did not necessarily mean that the entire system collapsed. You could still fight from the other forts.
Like the concentric walls of a Crusader castle, defense in depth is again deployed. But now adapted to the age of modern warfare. Verdun's fortress system is soon tested in a momentous battle. At first, the Germans seem to be winning. They attack in February 1916, and by early March, Douaumont has been captured. In June, Fort Vaux falls as well. But the other French forts do their job.
While 2 of the major forts fall, Douaumont is the largest of the forts by far. The system itself holds, and as a result, the Germans don't get into Verdun and they can't cross the Meuse River in force.
Douaumont is recaptured by French forces in October, and they eventually win the Battle of Verdun. Success that influences their generals after the war as they try to fortify France against future attacks.
After the war, the idea was to extend these fortifications along the border
to protect the country against a new kind of attack.
And French leaders realized that a drop in the country's birth rate would put them at a major disadvantage should Germany attack again.
The French in the 1930s had a major manpower problem. They could not compete with Germany in terms of mobilizable manpower of military age.
Their solution is the Maginot Line.
France's Maginot Line blazes into action.
It has similarities with Verdun's defensive system.
The theory behind the Maginot Line is to take some of those same principles, underground fortifications, interlocking systems, systems that mutually reinforce one another, to create a defensive line that would help France in a future war.
French military planners thought command and control could be achieved with this method of defense. Today, hidden in the hills of eastern France, is some of the Maginot Line. Armored gun emplacements, tank traps, and man traps. All part of Hackenberg Fortress. It's a series of linked combat blocks. Here, at Block 5, each opening would have been occupied by an artillery piece. Much of what is exposed today was hidden back in the 1930s. Camouflaged observation turrets were just one feature of Hackenberg.
By the standards of the time, the Maginot Line was really incredibly sophisticated.
They were using all the technologies that could be used at that time. I mean, revolving turrets with a high rate of fire.
An electrically powered gun turret has been restored. It houses cannon that would rise up, shoot several shots, then disappear from view. Underground, Hackenberg's extent is revealed. 10 kilometers of tunnels, served by their very own train. Designed to be self-sufficient if the electricity is cut, diesel engines can generate power for the combat blocks. Every part of the Maginot Line is made as strong as possible.
The defensive is supreme, i.e. it's far better to sit in your defenses and smash the enemy to pieces as he attacks you, rather than move out of those defenses and be the people who are doing the dying.
When World War II comes, though, warfare has moved on. German generals know they cannot command the battlefield by a direct attack on the Maginot Line, but exploit the drawbacks of these static defenses.
And it's hardly surprising that when they launched their major attack against France in 1940, that they would not do so in northeastern France, which was very well defended, but rather through Belgium, which was a lot more weakly defended.
The Maginot Line did its job. The Germans did not attack it in 1940. They went around it because they respected the power of the Maginot Line.
Speed and mobility are the keys to their success, making the Maginot Line obsolete. Blitzkrieg, rapid armored thrusts, combined with the devastating impact the warplane now brings to battle, enables a German advance through Belgium, exposing a vulnerable section of the French frontier. Despite this experience, the Germans fall victim to the same limitations of static defense with their Atlantic Wall. Huge concrete defenses had been built along the coast of Western Europe. But on D-Day in 1944, the Allies overcome them.
When you try to rely upon static defenses to defend great long frontiers, really, you're never going to achieve the densities of strength that you need to stop an enemy anywhere. The enemy's always got the initiative. He can decide where to attack, in what strength to attack, to what purpose to attack.
Since World War II, success in warfare has increasingly depended on mobility, a commander's capacity to rapidly adapt and sometimes change the battlefield environment. And so, in the global conflicts of the 21st century, the skills of the military engineer are more important than ever. Generals needing command and control rely on them to help gain offensive or defensive advantage. Here, British engineers erect temporary fortifications at Bagram Air Base, Afghanistan, preparing the ground for the arrival of new troops. And just as Roman legionaries shaped the landscape at Masada 2,000 years ago, so today, modern soldiers still use the pick and shovel to mold the terrain as they engineer the ground for war.